Sir, I think we're ready to get started, if you're ready. All right, we're live. Love it. All right, good evening, everyone. This is the regular meeting of the Yellow Springs Village Council for August 20th, 2018. And Judy, if you could do the roll call, please.
Yes, Hausch.
Yes.
McQueen.
Here.
Stokes.
Here.
Krieger.
Yes.
And we expect Judith Humpling at any moment. Also present are Village Manager Patty Bates and Village Solicitor Chris Connard.
Okay, great. I do just want to clarify that we had scheduled an executive session, but that did not happen. So we're just convening right now at 7 o'clock. And with that, do we have any announcements?
I have two. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, there was a report from the Greene County CATS, our local transportation system, that included an agenda for their board meeting and also their schedule, which was interesting. I know some local people, right? Did you?
I did.
I went on the road also.
Yeah, Kevin was there.
Rode around
Yep.
Yep.
last Friday?
Yep. A couple Fridays ago. Yep.
That is the only announcement. I have, there are a number of petitions and communications, but that's
Okay.
the only announcement.
Great. Patty?
I have two announcements. One is that as part of the sponsorship that council gives to Tecumseh Land Trust for the Harvest Auction, there are two tickets here that are at council's disposal. If you want to let Brian know if someone is interested. And the other announcement that I have is that I would like to wish Councilperson Lisa Krieger a happy birthday later this week.
Wow.
Thanks.
Happy
27
birthday.
already.
Cool. And I do have one announcement. September 8th, that's a Saturday, there is going to be a Trails Transform America event at Devil Wind in Xenia. And this is to celebrate their new protected bike lane. We have the Ohio to Erie Friends that are going to be doing their annual fundraiser, so they're spending the night in Xenia. A lot of elected officials are invited to attend, and
We can ride our bikes.
and we are going to do a bike ride from the brewery starting at 4. So, yeah, I want to ride as well. But I wanted to encourage all council members to try to attend, whether they ride their bikes or not, because one of the things that's really important about Trails Transform America is that it really highlights that it revitalizes communities. Yellow Springs has benefited immensely. Xenia is doing some amazing things. And I think highlighting that regionality and connectivity is really important. So I hope that we all try to attend. So with that, we've got a consent agenda with the minutes from our regular meeting of July 17th. And also we had the special meeting about infrastructure. I'd like to have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move that we approve.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Anything we want to review with the agenda?
I wanted to add on a short item regarding Justice System Task Force is working on a lot of items that are kind of coming to completion quickly.
Mhm.
And I think, Beth Crandall, who's kind of one of our coordinators, helped me put together this little document that I sent out. So anyway, we need some guidance.
So this
I think,
is
from
kind of-
council about how we are going to handle that.
The timeline for wrapping
timelines.
things up?
Yeah, for how things, yeah.
Okay, good. Anything else?
Where do you want to put it, though?
Oh, sorry. So I think that is in new business,
Yeah, behind survey one.
because these are new items that we're looking at
Yeah.
mostly. Lisa, something else?
I just have
Mary?
a very short update about the Housing Advisory Board and Planning Commission.
Okay. And so that would
I'll
go
put that in new business, too.
in new business? Okay. And I think we should talk briefly about the recommendation process from commissions. Because I know something was raised to all of our attention about maybe some recommendations that may not have been passed by staff or council, which may be fine, but I thought maybe we should just talk about it for a few minutes and decide if we need to have a longer conversation. So if that's okay, we'll add that to new bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yes, okay.
But what I was going to say is I'm not clear on when we might be able to take some initial action as a follow-up to our infrastructure meeting, like some of the hot opportunities, the camera, the computer. I mean, there's a couple of things that came out of that meeting that seemed like
Yes.
we could move on sooner rather than later. So I don't know when.
Oh, the infrastructure meeting?
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry, yeah. Well, we're already looking at cameras and.
Okay, so how about in your manager's report?
Mm-hmm.
Because there were some action items that we had,
Yeah.
and so Patty can update on that, because I know they've been thinking about that, so
Oh,
that's
good.
great. So we'll do that in the manager's report. Cool. Anything else? All right, then, Mary Ann, petitions and communications?
Okay. We had several communications in support or concern with Corporal Meister. One was from his wife with multiple concerns about the department, another from Pan Rich, and one from Christine Roberts. We had a communication from Barbara Mann supporting the village maintaining the sidewalks and thanking us for focusing on them. Letter from Wayne Golden. Is that it?
Yep.
Golden. He was concerned about the noise in particular at Springfest and noise in general, and suggested that we have a community conversation about what's acceptable, what to do about that. Rachel McKinley submitted a treasury report with the balances in our different fund accounts and the earnings in those accounts and some other information about our finances. The Environmental Commission, actually it's Matthew Lawson, who is sitting in the audience, developed a stormwater informational flyer that is, when it's completed, is going to be inserted into the utility bills that come out within a month, maybe next month. The month where we have our ground opening for the water plant, or not ground.
They'll probably come out in the bills that come October 1st.
Ribbon
So-
cutting.
Ribbon
You
cutting,
meant, yep.
sorry, yeah. So it appeared in the council packet, but it did not appear as a flyer, unfortunately, so it's sort of hard to tell exactly how it would read. But I really appreciate Matthew doing this. Stormwater is becoming more and more important, and we're going to be dealing with it. So this is for council and the community's information, and if any council members have things that they see in there that they, suggestions or changes or anything, you can let me know or Patty know, and we'll make those changes. Then finally, Krista Buchan is having an interactive art project about the glass farm, and I think what it is, it's sort of like, I think it's sort of a mat, and you can put things on it like how you'd like to see housing on the glass farm, and it's an Arts Council project. The reception is the 12th of September from 5 to 8. And it's being shown at Antioch Midwest.
And so then, just related to the flyer, maybe we should be more specific about like deadlines, when we'd want to get comments back.
How about by the end of this month?
Yeah, and then if we could we have a printed out version to look at the, what is it, September 4th council meeting? Before we mass print them?
And
Okay.
I'd like to ask Matthew, I think, did you say that if it were printed in a certain way, then things would line up, and another way they weren't?
They should be. I mean, in regards, if they were sending them to you and they were coming up kind of, I noticed after it said the community members was kind of off tilted on the left-hand side. But if I sent it as a PDF file, which I did, that should correct that. But if whomever's printing it should look at that. and
Okay.
make the appropriate adjustments.
Yeah, because our version of PDF sometimes corrupts files. So, yeah, so if you, that would be good. And then I just wanted to make sure the panels lined up the way it was intended. So, cool.
It should, kind of basically, the only thing that was off-center was the front cover, which should be on the same level as the flyers prior to that, which was much.
I'm thinking about when it's actually tri-folded.
Yes.
It wasn't clear to me that things were where they were meant to go, but maybe they are.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry about that. Yes. So yeah, as long as I can resend it to you in a PDF file, and that will help kind of recenter that. Because what had happened is I had it on a Google document. And then that, when it seemed to be printed out, Patty, it seemed to be kind of, one of the phrases was, off center a little bit. But I believe I did send that to you in a PDF file, but I can resend that and we can take a secondary look at that. But whomever's printing it, as I said, should be able to correct that on whatever file they have.
But when you fold them, and then, so you're seeing the front, the front flap,
Mhm.
and then it opens up, and I think what Brian is talking about is that you're seeing the information in the order that you actually want people to see it.
Oh, yes.
I want to double check. But yeah, but if we have a printed version before we send it out, that'd be great.
Yes, I think, yeah, oh, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
And I want to say I love it. I think I appreciate the effort. I think it's a really good document to send out, so thanks a lot.
Happy to, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So with that, we're going to get into public hearings and legislation. And Judy, if you could read in by title only, Resolution 2018-27.
Yep, this is approving a one-year extension of the existing I'm sorry, we're changing that to a two-year extension of the existing contract with Rumpke Waste Services.
Okay. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
I move.
Second?
Okay. Well, I guess Patty, why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
Sure. When we initially went out for competitive bids 3 years ago on our solid waste contract, Rumpke won. That was a 3-year contract, and they provided the opportunity for a certain number of extensions. We have 2 extensions remaining, and they have offered to us to lock the prices in for 2 years instead of revisiting again next year. The reason that we're passing the resolution before we pass the ordinance tonight is that you have to give me the authority to sign the contract before we can put the rates into effect.
I have a question. At the top of the resolution, it says a 1-year extension, and then section 1, it says
2 years.
2 years.
There was a change, because they gave us 2 one-year extensions.
Yeah.
So Patty's recommendation is that we just do the 2-year.
Yeah, when I asked them for the addendum to the contract, I expected them to send me a 1-year. So I had written this ahead of time because I expected it to be in the last
So
packet.
it is 2 years.
So it is a 2-year
Okay.
extension.
And just so that we're clear, Rumpke won, but Rumpke was the only bidder, right?
No, we had 3 bidders.
We did have?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, we had Waste Management and Green something as well.
And so maybe we should highlight, what was it that, I thought that we decided that Rumpke was able to do things that the others were not able to do?
Rumpke's providing the recycling program. That was the major difference between them. They're providing the recycling program as part of the standard rates for everybody.
Okay. And the other 2 were not,
We're not providing the recycling
Right.
program.
so we're the only bidder that
Mhm.
could fill all our needs. Okay. Any other questions or comments from council? Questions or comments from citizens?
on this particular issue?
Yeah, okay. If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay. So then we've got Resolution 2018-31, and Judy, if you could read this in full.
All right, this is adopting a housing vision and value statement for the Village of Yellow Springs. Whereas Yellow Springs Village Council is committed to the provision and nurturance of a welcoming community, and whereas this effort requires in part the availability of diverse housing stock, and whereas council acknowledges the need for an intentional and informationally grounded approach to increasing housing stock, now therefore be it resolved by council for the Village of Yellow Springs that Section 1, the housing vision and value statement here attached as Exhibit A is hereby adopted.
I think it'd be nice if
Yeah.
we read this statement.
Yeah,
Could
the
I say
statement.
something
Yeah.
just before it gets read? So it's actually two statements. The vision is one sentence, and that's the first sentence. So it really should be isolated and then drop space. That didn't come out in this form, but that's how it would be.
Do you want to read the statement?
Okay, I'll read it. So, Yellow Springs Housing Vision Statement is, Yellow Springs has a housing stock that enables a diverse community to live and work here. The housing value statement, Yellow Springs Village Government with community members is committed to being a welcoming community, which is environmentally and economically sustainable. This requires housing that enables people of diverse races, ages, sexual orientations, gender identities, ethnicities, economic statuses, physical and mental abilities, religious affiliations, skills, and lifestyles to be able to afford to live here. We aim for a balanced population across the age spectrum, valuing seniors as well as children and those in between, single people as well as families. We understand that each villager contributes to the wholeness and health of the community and are particularly committed to those struggling to remain in Yellow Springs because of affordability challenges. We also welcome newcomers wishing to move to our community. We encourage housing and workplaces that allow villagers to live and work here. We recognize that while home ownership is a goal for many, there are many others for whom renting is the best option, and we seek a balance of both. Mixed income housing and increasing density in all new developments will be essential to reach our goals of promoting affordability and healthy neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to get a motion.
So move.
Second.
Okay. Comments from council members?
I like it.
All right, and we've obviously looked at this a couple times and made a few refinements. Any questions or comments from citizens? All right, if not, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, and lastly, we have ordinance 2018-29. Judy, let's go ahead and read it in full.
Okey doke. This is approving amendments to Part 10, Streets, Utilities, and Public Services Code Title 6, Other Services of Chapter 1060, Storage and Collection of Garbage and Other Wastes, regulating charges related to the services to the Village of Yellow Springs, Ohio. Whereas the Village of Yellow Springs provides solid waste services to properties throughout the village, and whereas in 2015, the village signed a contract with Rumpke for the collection of garbage and other wastes, which included charges to the cost of said services, and whereas said contract allowed for periodic extensions of the contract at specific stated rates, and whereas Chapter 1060 of the Codified Ordinances of Yellow Springs, Ohio outlines the fees the village will charge its customers for these services, and whereas Chapter 1060 needs to be amended to reflect these increased costs, now therefore Council for the Village of Yellow Springs, Ohio hereby ordains that Section 1, existing Section 1060.05A charges of Chapter 1242 of the Codified Ordinances is hereby repealed in its entirety. Section 2, a new Section 1060.05A is hereby enacted to read as follows. A, charges. 1, the base charges for the collection and disposal of garbage, refuse, and/or recyclables shall be in accordance with the following monthly rate schedule. Note the reference to quantities below are exclusive of bulk items from residential premises and of the volumes of recyclables from recycling bins provided to all customers. A, monthly charge per volume of garbage collected weekly residential service. This is September 1, 2018 to August 21st, 2019. Tier 1, $11.69 per unit per month. Tier 2, $12.81 per unit per month. Tier 3, $13.93 per unit per month. And then September 1st, 2019 to August 31st, 2020, Tier 1, $12.04 per unit per month. Tier 2, $13.19 per unit per month. Tier 3, $14.35 per unit per month. Section B, commercial services, 4 cubic yard container. September 1, 2018 through August 31st, 2019 is $73 per container per month. September 1st, 2019 to August 31st, 2020 is $75 per container per month. Section C, recycling. All rates quoted above under residential service include weekly curbside recycling collection. Each resident will be provided with one 65-gallon recycling waste wheeler to hold their commingled recyclables. D, for the purpose of excess containers of garbage or refuse, the village manager is authorized to provide additional stickers for containers or bags available at the village utilities office. Cost for said stickers shall be September 1, 2018 to August 31, 2019, $1.45 per sticker. September 1, 2019 through August 31, 2020, $1.50 per sticker. Section E, yard waste shall be collected on the last Friday of every month, April to November. Yard waste must be in Rumpke-provided bag. The village manager is authorized to provide such bags to the public. Bags shall be made available at the village utilities office. Cost for said bags shall be September 1, 2018 through August 31, 2019, $2.30 a bag. September 1, 2019 through August 31, 2020, $2.35 a bag. Section F, the fuel surcharge will be adjusted on a monthly basis based upon the Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration Highway Diesel Price Index reading for the Midwest region on the last Monday of the month. A fuel surcharge will be added to the monthly rates in accordance with that information. A, all surcharges incurred by the village for the disposal of vehicle tires, appliances containing chlorofluorocarbon, etc., shall be billed at cost. B, one-time collections and special services, for example, large volume users, multiple collections per week, off-street commercial collections, etc., shall be billed at the costs incurred by the village plus a 10% processing fee. Section 5, the village shall provide an annual cleanup to customers of the village solid waste service. The village manager shall establish rules and the time of the cleanup. The cost of the service shall be an additional fee set annually by council per account to be billed separately on the bill or a notice. Cost shall be $195 per ton plus fuel surcharges for the period of September 1, 2018 to August 31, 2019. And shall be $201 per ton for the period of September 1, 2019 to August 31, 2020. Section 3, this ordinance shall be passed as an emergency as relates to the safety, health, and welfare of the village and its citizens and will become effective and in full force effective September 1, 2018.
All right, thanks, Judy, for reading through that. But I wanted to make sure that we understood what the contract was about. And with that, can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
I have a question. I'm sure there's some citizens, maybe some council members, that have Home Depot or some other type of yard waste bag. Is it possible to put yard waste in one of those bags and then put a sticker of some sort on the bag?
You can put them in there, but you still have to get the Rumpke bag and wrap it around it. And I argued this with them till I was blue in the face when we were negotiating the original contract, and they stuck to it, so.
Okay. I'm sure someone was concerned about that.
Yeah, it's good to know.
Yeah.
Anything else? Questions or comments from citizens? And since this is an emergency reading, we're going to be opening the public hearing.
Did you want me to explain why?
Sure.
We originally had this on the council agenda for back in July, but Rumpke did not get us the addendum in time. And then because the first meeting in August is canceled, this is the first opportunity that we've had to read this ordinance, resolution and ordinance, and the rates expire September 1st or August 31st. So that's why this needs to go into effect immediately.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. Okay, if we have no, yes, Megan, please come up to the mic.
Did you say that the prices were increasing? All the prices that you listed, is that an increase?
Yeah, yes, for instance, for tier 1, it's 34 cents, I think. For tier 2, it's 37 cents. For tier 3, it's 40 cents. But yeah, they all went up slightly, yes.
Okay, anything else? All right, then let's close the public hearing. And Judy, if you could do the roll call, please.
Yes, McQueen,
Yes.
Hempfling,
Yes.
Krieger,
Yes.
Stokes,
Yes.
Hausch.
Yes. Okay, so we are now at citizen concerns. This is the time on the agenda when we accept any statements that are not on the agenda. And we do ask that you limit your time to 3 minutes. Judy Kittner is our timekeeper, and so she will let you know when 3 minutes have passed. And do we have any citizen comments? All right. And if you can state your name
Yes.
and also your address.
Okay. My name is Anna McClure, and I actually live in Beaver Creek. I used to live here in Yellow Springs for 11 years, but my daughter still goes to school here. My new address is 2899 Bonds Drive. And I am honored this evening to read a letter that Zoe Meister has written on her behalf, since she cannot be here due to work. So I'm just going to go right ahead. Dear Yellow Springs Village Council, first of all, I would like to thank all of you for your service. There are numerous issues which demand your attention and often in a contentious manner. Working with the public is a challenge, especially when people neglect to be kind and fail to show appreciation. I am writing this open letter that I had initially shared with the Yellow Springs News last week in its first draft, unedited. The urgency that compelled me to give them my rough draft was mostly that I wanted their feedback. Publishing it was not something that I felt confident would be safe as a spouse of a village peace officer, but ultimately, I think it was wise on their part. Timing is essential at this juncture. It was the right choice. The rapid turnover in the Yellow Springs Police Department needs to be addressed. There have been at least a half a dozen officers that have resigned just in the short space of time since Dave Hale's abrupt departure in the early days of 2017. There are only 4 full-time officers and 2 part-time on the force at this time, supervised by the 2 corporals, 2 sergeants, and the chief. 11 in total, with 5 of them being supervisors. We have had at least 9 law enforcement officers leave in less than the past 24 months. My husband was hired just over 8 years ago, and to this date, there is only one that is full-time currently that was there the day he started and remains. That would be Naomi Watson, formerly known as Naomi Penrod. Sergeant Dennis Nipper has since retired from full-time working, now on a part-time peace officer status. There was an interdepartmental investigation launched into quite serious accusations against retired Sergeant Nipper on December 22nd, 2015, 3 days before Christmas, for which he was put on an unpaid administrative leave that lasted over a half a year. Ultimately, he was exonerated, and essentially there was not a thing that was discovered during his temporary dismissal. On that day that his forced absence was initiated without explanation, Sergeant Josh Knapp brutally arrested Jane Nipper when she confronted Chief Hale inquiring about the nature of the administrative leave and the pending investigation. It was later deemed by a judge in a court of law that there were 0 grounds for that arrest. Yet there was never any type of reprimand for Sergeant Knapp or even an apology given. Additionally, none of the multiple outdoor surveillance cameras ever produced a single video of the incident from which she suffered physical injuries and required medical treatment into evidence. There is some footage that was released of the sergeant continuing to berate, intimidate, and verbally abuse his severely traumatized prisoner as she was held in captivity inside the police department, still in handcuffs, which are usually removed once the arrested individual is detained and placed in custody. Sergeant Knapp then denied Mrs. Nipper her right to have her case heard in the Yellow Springs Mayor's Court, which would have been the proper procedure. My husband, Corporal Dave Meister, is currently experiencing nothing but dissension from his 3 supervisors, the chief and his 2 sergeants. He has been ensnared in a bitter cutthroat competition with these people who have had power over him simply to preserve his job of protecting and serving his community.
And you're at 3 minutes.
May I have more time?
We did receive the letter.
Yeah, so
This is
I,
an updated version.
okay.
If,
So I see that there's another page, which means
Yes.
another 4 minutes. Would it be possible just to summarize, since we do have the
Or you
letter?
could leave the page and we could copy it.
I'm not sure that I could accurately summarize all of her passion in here without reading it.
Well,
So
is there a substantial difference between, what's the date on the one that you have?
she just redid it today.
Go ahead and finish reading the letter.
Thank you. And he is a model employee with exemplary work history and a stellar reputation. In his entire career here or anywhere else, there has never been a formal citizen complaint filed against him, nor had there ever been a situation in which a supervisor had to give him a written reprimand for anything. That all changed around 5 years ago when the 2 current sergeants were promoted into their roles as his supervisors by then Chief Pettiford. The series of admonishments were almost entirely from Sergeant Naomi Watson. There is only one that is not. It was one of the very first, and it was initiated by Sergeant Josh Knapp. These punitive measures inflicted routinely are harsh, petty, and extreme. One example is a case of a missing iguana. A couple had broken up, one of them moved out their shared residence, and their pet lizard, of which they had been arguing about in the custody, was absent from his glass cage. Corporal Meister had removed a pad of paper from the scene after it had been photographed, which he then delayed entering into evidence until the following morning. Sergeant Knapp, rather than simply communicating with him on the correct action in the chain of custody, the most severe form of punishment allowable was executed. The abuse of power is obvious. Dave is a conscientious individual who desires and expects constructive criticism from anyone who feels compelled to offer it, especially as a supervisor. That is not what any of these current investigations or proposed disciplines are about. They are not designed to help improve skills or strengthen abilities. The occupying leadership, quite simply, has been trying to drive Dave to quit or get fired, just as they have succeeded with the rest of the entire department that was there 8 years ago. The hostility directed at him has risen to an even more heightened level this past year and a half, and it still continues to escalate in an extremely antagonistic and petulant work environment. Public safety is what is really at stake here. Corporal Meister has single-handedly saved lives and arrested multiple armed bank robbers without incident or harm to anyone involved while on patrol. He is well-liked and strongly educated, both tactically and vigorously academically. The Evergreen State College, where he received his bachelor's degree of science, had an extraordinary elite program that the majority of students dropped out of rather than completed. Before he even graduated, he had become a renowned leading expert in the specialized scientific field of studying bats. His research helped to recognize their integral importance in the ecosystem of the Puget Sound, protecting them from the dangers associated with the impending growth, explosion, and overdevelopment of that time. His objective expertise translates seamlessly into the safe supervision of the handling of volatile situations, approaching difficult individuals, managing people in crisis, and taking charge in unpleasant and sometimes dangerous events. There is simply no way for the department to move forward and be functional in the service and protection of our village, especially the most vulnerable individuals. I'm referring to specifically the children in our schools, with the current leadership in the Yellow Springs Police Department. The sergeants and chief have created a vile work environment. They have each individually, as well as together, directly threatened Corporal Meister on numerous occasions. Bullying, undermining, sabotage, and retaliatory treatment need to be formally and thoroughly investigated. Dave has been extremely patient and cooperative for many months and years, having faith in his supervisors, trusting that they have been given their best efforts, and believing that they will improve over time. But their dishonorable treatment of him and utter lack of decency has only continued to deteriorate, while the welfare of the community we live in is what hangs in the balance. Respectfully yours, Zoe Van Eaton-Meister.
All right. Thanks, Anna. Do we have any other citizen concerns? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, guys. My name's Sean, and I have actually never been to a Yellow Springs Village Council meeting in my adult life, although I have grown up here in Yellow Springs, and I'm happy to be here with you all. I understand that there's a lot of very important issues here expressed today. I'd like to speak to you today about child safety.
And Sean, can you just tell us your address, please?
And
Yeah.
the last name too, please. Just
Yeah.
short.
So my address is 250 King Street.
And Telecky? Your last name?
Sean Leon Telecky Paulson is my full name.
Thank you. Okay.
So this incident happened many years ago where I was raped as a kid by a police informant working for the Yellow Springs Police. I shared about it at the Justice System Task Force meeting, and for months after, there circulated the false story that the guy was not working for the police, and that I was mistaken. I want you all to know I was not mistaken. I believe this story was circulated in an attempt to dismiss any scrutiny of the police. I want to challenge those who may have heard this false narrative and spread the false rumor that he was not working for the police to consider the seriousness of those actions for taking part in covering up mistakes made by the YSPD. And if you feel you made a mistake, please take immediate action to correct for that mistake. This is not the first time in this small town that the police have put children's needs not to be sexually preyed on below other priorities. My Uncle Roy, who grew up here in the 60s, had a similar incident in which a pedophile was not investigated and even was protected by the police, by their own admission, out of a concern that the pedophile might be killed if he was prosecuted, and went to jail. I believe you council members are not okay with our police prioritizing other needs above children's needs not to be sexually abused. To change this will require your action. I raise this here now because I feel it is important that we look seriously within and consider what actions we can take personally and collectively to ensure that the needs of keeping children safe from sexual abuse is made and kept a high priority by the YSPD for the current youth and for the next generation. For the last 8 months, I and several others have advocated for a civilian review board of the police at the Justice System Task Force meetings. Some of the most resistant to implement such mechanism came from members of the subcommittee called the Police Working Group. The Justice System Task Force prioritized in July sending a recommendation to the council regarding a civilian review board as a top priority. Due to citizen demand. No other recommendation from the Justice System Task Force has had nearly as much comment from the public. Then the public working group that had been resisting the idea got the JSTF's agreement to recommend to council that a separate body be created to be tasked with looking into setting up a police review board.
And you're at 3
And,
minutes.
okay, can I just finish? I'm almost there.
Okay.
And that, thank you, and that this board, to set up a board, would meet in a closed meeting, not open to the public, and would be attended by the police. If the council takes this action, this will act to shelter the police from community demands for community oversight of the police. I ask you to task the Justice System Task Force to finish the work of setting up a civilian review board of the police before they disband, and at least not to disband the Justice System Task Force before another public commission is created and tasked to set up an oversight board. When current police have said they think that the Justice System Task Force is a nuisance, and lies have been spread claiming they did nothing wrong in using a convicted pedophile as an informant, when they have demonstrated in multiple ways that they do not wish to have any mechanism out in place that would make them accountable for their actions, or even transparent to the taxpayers that pay their salary, we must use the power we have as a civilian government to enact laws that require their compliance in prioritizing the needs of children not to be sexually abused. We must do more than ask the police how they wish to be reformed, or ask whether they are doing a good job with our tax dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And I do want to comment that we do plan to have that topic on a future agenda item, I believe in September, and we're going to talk about that more later in the meeting. All right, thank you. Any other citizen concerns? Okay, then we're going to move to special reports. I believe, Deward, you are here to update us on the Vernay property.
I am. My name is Deward Headley. I'm a member of the Yellow Springs Environmental Commission. Just wanted to give you a brief update on what's happening with the Dayton Street former Vernay facility. Vernay still owns the property. As most of you know, it is currently an active site under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which is supposedly known as the fast track for Superfund, but it's been 16 years since the initial plan was filed, or they agreed to file the initial plan. In April, Vernay submitted their final amendments, their proposed final amendments to the US EPA. The US EPA is currently reviewing them. If they accept them, they'll submit, or they'll issue a statement of basis. After that, there'll be a 30-day public comment period, followed by which, if there's no change from that comment period, the plan could be implemented, and there's a 90 to 270 day timeline for implementing the plan. So that's the timeline. The Environmental Commission did a review of the cart that's in the library with all of the contents, as well as the amendments. I don't know if anybody's seen that cart, but it's an amazing amount of paper. And there are some positive things about the plan. The two most positive things are they're going to continue to operate the 4 groundwater extraction wells on the site until they meet effectively safe levels of those ground contaminants remaining in the water. And they're also going to do some soil extraction. So those are a couple of the positive things. There are some reasons to be concerned. The specifics of what they're going to do on the site actually aren't spelled out that well, including what the soil extraction would actually be. There's a lot of uncertainty around whether or not there's actually contamination in the bedrock and whether they're going to address that. I think most significantly, there are no off-site remediation measures other than what's currently in place. The water is being treated in the pre-treated groundwater is being treated in the the sanitary sewer treatment facility that the village operates. But other than that, there's no actual treatment of the plume that extends down essentially to Green Street. It's our recommendation that the council be actively involved in the process, and that that we think it's even reasonable that the village fully understand their legal liabilities once the site's cleaned up, because some of the actual contamination is in the stormwater and sewage where wastewater lines up near the Dayton facility.
So what does it mean to be actively involved?
I think the most important thing is understanding what the village liabilities are. I'm not legal counsel, so I won't go into that. But if if there are legal liabilities that the village could be left with, then you have a unique standing. And certainly, any communication with the EPA, certainly during the public comment period, or even leading up to that, is certainly reasonable. Letting them know specifically what your concerns are. And I know also the village staff reviewed what turned into a 3.5-page brief summary, and we added their comments and concerns to that as well.
Right.
Can I also ask, so the plan is accepted, what does that mean in terms of the ability to, really rehabilitate that property?
Well, and I actually missed that concern. Effectively, the plan states that the way it's going to be cleaned up today is that property will ever have some pretty significant use restrictions placed upon it.
You say that it will,
It
that
will
they're saying
have-
that it will?
Yeah, it will have significant use restrictions. Another part of the plan is recommending that recommending that the village pass a well ordinance in an area around the Bernay property, limiting the ability of people to use wells to put in wells and certainly use them for drinking water, but that's another part of the plan as well.
Do you know what the use restrictions are?
The use restrictions are effectively for it to remain industrial. I don't know the exact term, but industrial use only, but there's a lot of very specific restrictions around if there would be building, if anybody were to attempt to dig out there, and they're quite extensive and specific.
Yeah, for instance, one of the things that we've talked about potentially having on that property, if Renee would agree to it, was a solar array, a further solar field. In order simply to build that, the way the plan is written, or the proposed plan is written, that the construction workers would have to wear vapor suits to install the solar array because of digging into the ground. One concern that village staff had is that it discusses the Cedarville aquifer, which is below that. That's not the aquifer that we currently get our drinking water from, but the water that's going into the Cedarville aquifer, and correct me, Stuart, if I'm wrong, it'll be non-potable, the groundwater that's going into there. Our question is, could that eventually affect our aquifer? And we're trying to find that out. Right now, nobody can seem to get a map of the Cedarville Aquifer, or where it gets its water from, or where it sends its water to. We have concerns about the rerouting of the storm system on there, because it's the way it is for a very specific reason, because there are some springs under that area. So the question is, how are you gonna reroute that, and will it work as effectively as we need it to? So we do have concerns about it that we're gonna have to express.
So my sense is that the Environmental Commission should be
Right,
continuing to work
we
with
are.
staff.
Continue to work together, yes.
And when we're dealing with waste, or stormwater, you know, we're talking about our infrastructure that's under the ground.
Mhm.
And it seems like there's potential impacts there if you're talking about people have to wear these vapor suits or whatever they're called.
Mhm.
Wow.
Some of the most contaminated areas are around the stormwater pipes on the edge of that facility, and that's part of the cleanup plan. But they're the hot spots because of the nature of what took place on the facility, and I won't attempt to characterize that, but as a result of those activities, those pipes have become one of the most contaminated areas, so I'll let you put the 2 and 2 together there. But and so that characterization, you know, there was a study that was done of those pipes in that area, but you know, there's potential for migration well beyond that area too. That is something that the village should be aware of.
So first of all, I do want to thank you for this report. I mean, you said part of our being involved is to be aware, and so this is certainly a big step in that direction. But you mentioned soil extraction. You said that their plan is vague in terms of what soil extraction would be.
Yeah,
What are the ranges?
Well,
of
they
what-
identified, they don't specify, they identified 4 locations, essentially almost pin drops, that they would then work around those areas, but they don't really define any more specifics in terms of how much soil they would remove and when they would decide to stop removing soil.
Or the levels they
Who are
would
they
leave
that
behind.
you're referencing?
I'm going Vernay and the firm that they've hired to, the environmental firm that they've hired, EHS.
And is it
Changed.
typical for, I mean, this is not the first time, you know, an industrial facility has shut down and we had these types of issues, but is it typical for them to claim, we were here, we're not responsible for plumes of stuff that goes outside of our area?
I don't think that they're claiming that they're not responsible. Their plan, they have no off-site remediation measures because their plan is that over time it will effectively dissipate, making it safe to the levels defined by the EPA. But effectively what that means is it becomes more dispersed but covers a greater area. So, you know, I hate the pun, but pick your poison, you know. Do you want to expose more people to less or fewer people to more? Or, you know, I think it's advisable that there's some action that's taken in that Green Street plume.
I guess I think that, given that maybe this will come up with the EPA this year, I mean, as
Yeah.
you said, it's been
Maybe.
16 years,
Yeah.
that council should direct staff and the environmental commission make this a top priority. To just, I mean, and I don't know whether it means we start writing down what we want to say when this comes up for review, or if we send something out before the review, I don't.
I think that's good, and I guess I just want to, and Stuart, I don't know if you know about this, but discussions I've had, we've been waiting on an approved plan so that we can figure out what to do with that property. And I mean, I know there are companies that, you know, specialize in these kinds of cleanups. So, I mean, isn't it in our interest to get some kind of plan approved that we can somewhat accept and then move on? And
I think personally, yes. I think what is understanding what's acceptable, because there's a lot of uncertainty around the extent of the aquifer contamination and the potential long-term implications of that. And effectively, this isn't absolutely true, but effectively, once there's a sign-off that that's your plan, and then, you know, where you go from there is a long, tricky, difficult, litigious road.
Okay.
So, I would very much advise also that the village council and village government look at what the potential liability for any uncleaned up contamination that's in or associated with village-owned infrastructure is.
Okay. All right, thank you.
If
Yep.
the digging right on the property requires protective wear, then people who are nearby, who are gardening, you know, is it just where it happened that there's a problem in terms of digging, you know, in the
Well,
topsoil?
I wouldn't want to
or is it-
speculate based upon the weather and wind conditions, or specifically whether, you know, the level of saturation in that area. I know I wouldn't want to be there, but just in general, but it depends on a lot of conditions and specifically what's taking place on the site.
Lisa?
I thank you for the report, and I support Mary Ann's comment. I think that we have a really very strong environmental commission. We have people that have the right knowledge and expertise. Really grateful for that, and I think we should, you know, take action to understand the situation and to make as many recommendations as we can that can protect us from liability and really make sure that we understand and the community understands what's going on.
I'd also like to thank Megan Bachman, who came to EC a few months ago to bring this topic up, and then Marcia Walgren, who's a citizen that's been working on this, who also came to EC a couple months ago.
Yep.
Thanks, Stuart.
All right, thank you, Dewar.
Thank you.
All right, we have another special report, and we have Patrick Bowen here to give us an update on our housing initiative.
Well, good evening. Again, Patrick Bowen, President of Bowen National Research. This is the third time I've been in front of you folks. I came out here in September to talk about the initial housing needs assessment, what we were going to do. You guys peppered me pretty good with some good questions, and it really affected, I think, what we ultimately did in the housing needs assessment. I think I issued a draft roughly in December. I came and presented that in January with various recommendations. And then I believe the Housing Advisory Board then in the spring conducted, I think three or four community meetings to get further input to kind of refine some of the thoughts of what the community believe could be done. I want to commend you on your vision value statement. That was a very good way to start the process, to send a good positive message of what the community wants to achieve and what it wants to be, and take advantage of, I think, a lot of the assets that the community offers. I noticed, I had about 15 or 16 recommendations in that initial draft, and you folks have kind of addressed the first and the last, so hopefully you didn't skip everything in between. But it's good to see some progress being made, because initially it was one of the goals was to start thinking about setting goals, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. One of the positive things too, I think you folks had me reserved for about 60 minutes. This should take me about 10 minutes. So I'll be available for many questions as you have for me. We'll go ahead and get started. Again, I only have about 7 slides here. If you recall, when I did the original presentation, one of the key findings was the actual housing needs, trying to quantify, what do you need in terms of different segments. We focused on 2 specifically, renter household units and for sale housing, and we broke it out by these different income segments and corresponding price points or rental rates. So one of the things that's critical to understand, there's a big difference here today that I'm going to talk about. One is housing needs. So that is, what I had in the original report, that is what the community needs to kind of meet its community needs, its shortages, to help people that need affordable housing and things like that. That is heavily, quantitative data, and a lot of stuff went into that as I kind of went through the original findings of the report. Today, I want to talk about the goals, and that's different because goals really are incorporating, using the housing needs numbers as a baseline, but now taking some of that community input, both what the Housing Advisory Board collected as well as the more than 500 survey responses we got from residents when we did our housing needs assessment, and more than a couple dozen stakeholders who commented and gave us insight. So with data as the baseline, but then trying to build in what the citizens believe would be useful, what kind of people you want to attract, what kind of folks you want to retain. There's where housing goals come into play. So this is our start point, the housing needs numbers, but I'm going to take you through now just a couple sets of things that, in terms of bedroom types and other age groups, that I think if the community wants to kind of set goals and kind of meet both the needs, but also attract and retain the folks you want to have here, there's where these goals come in place. The last thing I'll say before we get into the next slide is these are goals. And one of the things I don't want to happen is, this council somehow uses this as this is the bar, these are the numbers, this is what we need to shoot for. These are our recommendations based on a lot of different things. And there's a lot of ways that you folks ultimately can set goals. So I'm going to give you specific numbers, which is probably the most dangerous thing I could do. And that's why it wasn't really in the original report, because this gets really hard to quantify exactly what you need in different segments. And if we go to the next slide, this is probably the most ridiculous slide I could put together to show you how complicated this can get. So, there's a lot of things that affect why people choose housing. And this stuff. It's the schools, it's the transportation, it's the jobs, it's your income, it's your credit score. It's all those kind of things that will affect ultimately where you're going to live. And so we just threw this together to say, look, you have these different segments of households, whether it's the millennials, a married couple with dependents, seniors, whoever, and they're going to make a housing choice, whether it's a rental unit, for sale housing unit, whether it's affordable or if it's a high-end product type, or whether it's a senior care facility. There's a lot of things that go into that, and there's no way that anybody, as good as we are, could sit there and say, I know millennials are going to pick this product, so let's support that because we want to attract millennials. So there are things that you cannot predict, there's things that you can't control, but as a council, you can certainly encourage certain types of development that ultimately will encourage certain households, to stay in Yellow Springs or attract those folks that you think would benefit the community. So I just wanted to show you that, just to give you a quick illustration of how complicated this can get. All right, so these are potential goals by bedroom type. And I'll just spend on this very first table at the top. This will be the one I'll spend the most time on, only because I'll let you then later at your own pace kind of go through and read the other tables. I'll still cover them here today, but I'm not going to go into as great detail. So the very first table, rental household sizes by geography. And we had Yellow Springs at the top. And some of this data was in the report, but was not presented this way. And I thought this would be a good illustration to kind of show you, where you're maybe lacking as a community in terms of certain populations, but then how do you compare with the surrounding community? So we put Yellow Springs on there, different household sizes, 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, and so forth. And I highlighted the 4 and 5 person household sizes to show you that renter households, that are 4 persons or larger really represent a small share of your community, especially when you start to compare with the surrounding areas. The secondary study area, which was basically Greene County and just parts of the surrounding counties that we used in the original market study, the Dayton MSA, which is I think 3 or 4 counties encompassing Dayton and the surrounding areas, and then the state of Ohio. So it just gives you a reference point to show you how do you compare with other communities, what's normal in some degree. And then I put 5-year goals, and what I did here was just to show you, look, if you wanted to start to move towards a more balanced community, in the case of having 4 and 5 person households, while the surrounding communities might have 9 or 10% 4 person households, for example, maybe a 5-year goal is to try to get part of the way there. You've got 6% of your households that represent 4 persons in terms of renter households, so maybe set goals that get you closer to that 7 or 8% 5 years from now, and ultimately keep pushing towards these larger household sizes if that's what the community wants, if that's what council wants. And again, from the input that the Housing Advisory Board collected, that seemed to be one of the areas that folks wanted larger families to be welcome and want to come to Yellow Springs. And the same for other groups that I'll talk about in a second. So using, again, those housing needs assessment numbers that we had in the very beginning that I showed you on that first slide, we started to then take into account, what other unit types do you have? What is the community saying in terms of what housing product they want? what is a normal share in these surrounding communities, and we came up with these numbers. So again, these are just to give you some sense of, if you're trying to set some kind of goal, this may be one way to do it. Another way you could do it as a community, and it would really give you a lot of flexibility, is to say, well, you know what, we don't know the exact number that we ultimately want to support. Bowen has given us this total number of rental housing units he thinks that it can be supported over the next 5 years. But maybe we do half of our units at, 140 in this case is 2-bedroom unit as I have on here. That's about half of the housing need number. So maybe it's, as our goal, we want half of the new rental units that's developed over the next 5 years should be 2 bedrooms as a goal. So you could structure it that way. So that's just another example of, as you kind of go through the dialogue of how do we want to set these goals, that's another example. And I'm trying to just present one of the possibilities, okay? So we did the same thing for owner households, looking at different household sizes, again, comparing it with other communities. And then we came up with the estimates of how many 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms potentially could be supported. The one thing to keep in mind, if you look at both of the tables, and this is probably helpful to you as well. On the top half, the rental household sizes, even though you want to attract, in theory, larger family households, that is the smallest number I have recommended in terms of a housing goal. And the reason is because while you might have a goal as a community, there's things you're not going to control, right? People are going to get older, people are going to get married. In this case, in Yellow Springs, as much of the country, a lot of the growth is going to be in the smaller household sizes, 1 and 2 person households. So you can't stop that. So it's going to happen. And so I looked at all the statistics to say, look, you're going to grow in these areas. So you're still going to need smaller units to meet the needs of the community as it changes in the years ahead. So that's why we have this so much more heavy on these 1 and 2 bedroom household sizes. But you still want larger bedroom types like the 3 bedrooms to try to attract, again, larger families, which is really a product that you're really short on in terms of bedroom types. Okay? The next one. This is by age group. And now these will go real fast, these next 2 slides. So we did the same thing by different age groups. I highlighted in yellow. For renter households, you only have 4.5% of the renter households are under age of 25. And you can see a substantial difference with the surrounding areas. You don't have a lot of younger folks. And so we did that for all these different categories, compared it to all the surrounding areas, set some percentage goals, and then came up with those numbers at the bottom to say, look, if you're starting to think about projects as they come and you're setting policies and incentives and things like that, you might want to think of product that kind of fits these segments. With millennials, young adults, and young families probably being the area that you want to give a significant thought to. And then that's same for seniors as well. Again, your population of seniors is very high. I want to say about 45% roughly is age 55 and older. And so you have a lot of seniors, and if a goal is to attract millennials, why would we recommend a lot of units towards seniors? Because people are aging. You can't stop it. And so you're going to get more people to fall into that senior segment. You've got to continue to support projects that'll accommodate seniors, those that are downsizing into smaller units or maintenance-free living, things like that. And we did the same thing for owner households. Again, you don't have a lot of younger folks under the age of 35, the millennials that are homeowners, and much lower than the surrounding areas. So again, we made recommendations. That's a product type that certainly Yellow Springs wants to encourage if you want to have a balanced market. And then the last of the slides for the demand is by income group. And the only one I highlighted there was for Yellow Springs is the folks, renter households that make $35,000 to $49,000 a year. You're much lower than the surrounding areas. So that might be a segment that you want to, even though our housing needs assessment came back with 11 units, which is that next to last row on the renter table. If you want to get a balanced market, that's probably a segment you want to push a little bit more towards affordable rentals that are affordable to the folks that make between $35,000 and $49,000 a year. And then lastly on that page, the owner households by different segments and different price points of housing product. You don't have a lot of product priced under $150, or at least in terms of the housing needs numbers that we calculated. And so that might be a segment that you would want to encourage. Obviously, developers will have a challenge developing housing priced under $150, but that's certainly a segment that needs addressed. And if you recall, when I gave that presentation back in January, just one possible solution was, if you can encourage senior-oriented housing, a lot of folks are ready to downsize, can't maintain their homes. physically, financially, or whatever reason, just don't want to maintain them anymore. If you build something that you could transition into maintenance-free living that's affordable to them, that could free up a whole nother housing stock. Some of these could be houses that are big enough that could accommodate some of the families that you might be wanting to attract. So you could almost solve two problems with one development type. And the only other thing I just want to point out to you is I highlighted on the owner table, the far right column, those people that make $75,000 or more. Every one of the, I had highlighted your share of households at whatever segment we were looking at. You were disproportionately low. This one, you're high. And the reason I highlighted that was, if you look at the bottom number, I'm recommending that you'll still want to have some goals that support additional high-end housing. That's because that's where the projected growth is going to occur. So just like seniors, you can't stop it. If the economy trends the way it's supposed to and the demographics trend out the way they should, you're going to have people's incomes climb, people that have higher incomes in the surrounding area that might want to come to Yellow Springs. You're going to want to have housing that meets their needs. And the same for folks that are just living here today. Their income will climb, they will get married, have kids. They're going to want something that's bigger, that's maybe higher priced, and so you'll want to support higher priced product. And then the last is just reminders, and none of these are really anything you don't know, but I just want to stress again, these goals are goals. And so you want to just think about, this is a start point in terms of the dialogue that you folks want to have. The Housing Advisory Board, I'm sure we'll have more conversations, as well as council and staff. We'll probably want to talk this out a little bit further as how we want to set goals. But my purpose here today was at least start to nudge you in a direction to think about these things, to point out some of the possible pitfalls that are ahead of you. And for example, I put, village needs to be flexible in its approach to addressing housing. So as you folks have projects that get approved and get built, you will not want to rethink, okay, now if we have a senior project that has been approved, what else do we want to then support, because maybe senior housing's needs are being met. Again, that's not rocket science, but something just to be aware of as you build. You'll want to be aware of how that might impact other housing segments. Be aware of unpredictable market changes. Home mortgage interest rates could continue to climb, so that'll be a factor, could be a factor. Drastic shifts in mobility patterns, so meaning, hypothetically, you could have seniors that choose not to want to live here in Yellow Springs. They can't afford it. The housing stock doesn't meet their needs, especially for those, again, that want to downsize. So if you're hearing that, you're seeing that trend is occurring, you're going to want to shift your priorities as a community to say, okay, what do we need to do? We had goals to keep our seniors, but we're still losing them. How do we readjust our goals? And then finally, be aware of unpredictable housing industry changes. Airbnb growth, you folks had me look a little bit at Airbnb when we were here before. And I know, don't quote me on this, but I just read an article that I guess Airbnb is partnering with developers to sometimes, I don't think it'll happen here in Yellow Springs, but this is an example of things that you could not predict, or at least most people wouldn't predict, where they're coming in and working with developers to buy apartment buildings and converting them over to short-term Airbnb rentals. And so now you've lost this entire housing stock. That's just an example of something that could happen. So you need to be watching those kind of trends as they happen across the country, and could they happen here? And then just be aware of state and federal programs that are out there. Those things constantly change. OFA, the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, they have periodically incentives in place. They have certain mission statements or things that they're trying to push, and maybe a particular year they want to support adaptive reuse of old buildings. And so you want to be aware of those things that they might put out, or this particular year they might want to support senior-oriented housing, and so they have incentives in place to encourage that type of housing. So those are just a couple examples. So that's all I had, and I'm glad to answer any questions you have. By the way, I got here early today, and so I drove around, and I think I saw Yellow Springs differently today, because I think I was done. I'm here today to talk, and I'll always be available to you folks, Marion, you know that. So I'll always be available for questions and input. But I think today I was just looking at it as just a guy driving through town, and I just think I saw the beauty of this place. All the charming homes you have, there's something special, and that's rare that the community has that. And so, I didn't put that in our recommendations, but I would say, preserve what you have, preserve the vibe, the feel that you have, because this town has such great charm that, this is a place I wouldn't mind retiring to or something. So anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm wondering if other council members have comments, questions?
Yeah, well, just your last point, the report the summary was very thorough, so nothing necessarily generated from that, but just on your last comment, in Orlando, where I lived not too long ago, there's two areas I can think of. One is down by Disney Celebration.
Okay.
There's another one in the center of Orlando. And to your point about the charm, I mean, the houses that were built in this one area are brand-new homes. But, you know, they have the alleys, and they're built to look like older, charming homes. Does doing that type of a retro build, does that add much expense to typical houses?
I couldn't speak to expenses. We don't study that
Right.
piece of housing. I suspect it probably does,
Mhm.
but I'm not qualified to speak to that.
Yeah. Well, if you'd give me a direct answer, I would take this as expert opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I won't give it.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I have,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, I just had one question. You talked about one-bedroom homes and rentals. Is there really much demand for one-bedroom houses? I mean, I haven't seen that.
No, not a lot, but there'll still be some. And I'll give you an example, and I probably did this when I met with you in September. You know, if somebody came into this community and were to build some kind of condominium project, and somehow could keep the prices, so low, 110,000, 100,000, whatever it might be. The developer could pull that off. Well, they probably could sell a lot of those because it would be such a value to the market. So could one bedrooms be supported? They could. I would just say, it's probably healthy in the for sale market that it's, and I think I put in the report, 2 and 3 bedrooms would be ideal. If it's condominiums, probably 2 bedrooms is the ideal product. If it's detached single-family homes, it's probably the 3-bedroom. But it doesn't mean one bedrooms couldn't be successful. I just wouldn't do a lot of them.
So I think what you're saying is if there were a way to build one-bedroom homes that were significantly less expensive,
If they were perceived as a value,
that,
it could work. Yeah.
So Patrick, I'm wondering, I guess I'm thinking about just sort of the piece that happens with cultivating developers, and then also sort of how you, I guess, promote what you have, to some of these segments. Do you have any best practices that you can share?
Well, I think we had put, in fact, I think the memo, do you guys have the memo? I think the council members got that memo that kind of had these slides, but then I think there was like 5 or 6
Yes.
recommendations.
Mhm.
And so
Right.
that was in there, Brian. So it is cultivating relationships with developers, identifying developers. There's a lot of ways to do that, and I could certainly provide additional insight. But just for example, if you were doing affordable housing, the state of Ohio, people go through the tax credit program through OFA, and the list of those who have applied in the past and whether or not they got awarded tax credits or not, but the fact that they applied, that list is available. Obviously, there's, and I can provide that list to you folks quickly if you just want a list of who's active in Ohio.
Right.
And through that, you could probably figure out who's active in the southwest part of the state. Just attending housing conferences, networking. I don't know whose role that would be for the village, but certainly you could start to meet folks. A lot of developers have booths up at conferences, and there's obviously networking opportunities and stuff like that. But you could start to network with folks that way. Certainly through, I would suspect, your website, the village's website, you could promote. I think you already have the link of the housing study on there, but you could probably do something slick like a promotional piece, and I'd be glad to help you folks with that. Where it just kind of gets to the big picture stuff, not the nuts and bolts that I probably presented. Even the executive summary I gave you was pretty long. But there would probably be something you could put together that you could promote that says, we're open to residential development if it's the right type of development. And we can work to kind of craft basically off of your vision statement. Maybe that's even part of this piece. But ultimately build something in to say, look, somebody's looked at this independently and said this market is good, it's healthy, there's housing that is needed. Come invest in this community.
Cool. Yeah, I'm very interested in the first thing you said about who's active
Yeah.
in the region, because, again, I guess what I'd like to, I think we all should do is just kind of some, research around just, what the activity looks like specifically
I
So
can give you tons, I mean, you could reach out to brokers, you could reach out to realtors that are regionally involved. Maybe if you don't mind, maybe I just throw a memo together, just outline, here's some ideas if you want to start networking. Because I think you're on the right path. I think that's one of the next things you folks got to do is start to get, okay, who can we start to at least market ourselves to? And I can help with that.
Cool, thank you.
A couple of things. One, yeah, as I start to think about the one-bedroom apartment or house, yeah, if it's not significantly cheaper, then, I mean, most people, even older retired single people, generally have a two-bedroom. You know, they may
Yes.
have a grandchild stay over,
Yep.
you know, family come to visit, if they're not local. So I think, that's something we need to keep in mind. Another thing, just in terms of, our value statement, the last sentence says mixed income housing and increased density in all new development will be essential to reach our goals. And the increased density piece, I mean, there's probably a piece of work that needs to happen at planning there, I think. But the mixed income housing, we've said we want that everywhere. And of course, we have control of one piece of land, which is the glass farm, the village does. And then there's other land that is likely to come on the market relatively soon that we have no control over. And the money to be made is, on the higher end. And I wanted to note that we got a message from Emily Siebel from Home Inc. saying, just to note that if we do not achieve at least 50% of newly constructed units as affordable to those of moderate income making 100% or less of area median income, we're likely to exacerbate our affordability issue. So I guess, the way I've been thinking about it is, one thing we do control, and yes, maybe there's some, I think the majority of that housing that goes on the glass farm is going to have to be affordable housing. And of course, affordable housing is, a vague
Sure.
term, but that's just going to be essential. And I don't think the community will accept anything less than that. I'm going to say that right now. Secondly, when some of these other larger tracts potentially go on the market, if we want mixed income housing in all new development, then the village is going to have to do something to make that happen in those areas. And so, thinking about a fund by which the village can buy land for future, affordable housing development, I think is going to be the only way it's going to happen. It might not be the only way, I'll take that back. Mary Ann's had some, ideas and, thoughts. There might be some other ways, but I think the only way we can absolutely guarantee that it will happen is in that way. I think we need to really encourage the view that mixed income development and increased density promotes affordable and healthy neighborhoods. And the healthy neighborhoods piece, that we, because there's that kind of prejudice out there, where, people, with larger income, get segregated from people with lower income. And those are not healthy neighborhoods. And I think, we need to really be making that case because, it's, urban settings were, are vital places. The ones that are really still vital are ones where there is a lot of integration of different people, of different incomes. And so I think we need to be articulating that and not allowing, the idea that somehow there's, we should be afraid of that or something like that. Sometimes can come up.
May I
That's
speak to
all.
those things real fast?
Yeah.
So, in terms of what type of housing should be supported, our estimates for rental housing, more than half, just slightly more than half of what we recommend would be
Right.
Rental housing that's affordable to those that make $35,000 or less. So I think Emily's on the right track, and I think, Judith, you're on the right track as well. In terms of strategies, there's a lot of stuff. I think that one thing we recommended was it exclusionary or inclusionary zoning, and there might be some challenges to that. But there's other things you can do. And you talked about maybe building some kind of fund, a trust fund or whatever. There's other things you can investigate, like in lieu fees, where if a developer comes to your community and they want to develop, and you say, look, we want X amount of units to be affordable, and they can't do it, they don't want to do it, well, then they just have to then pay a fee to say, okay, we are not going to meet this requirement, but we'll put this money into this trust fund for your community. That could be one way to raise money. Another one's like density bonuses, where look, we'll let you do more units than normal if you promise to put in some affordable housing. So there's tactics you can do to try to encourage those things.
I think you can get a little bit that way, but I think if we want to get a little bit more than a little tiny bit, we may need to do more.
And you may have some developers that will come in, they're going to do affordable housing, and that's fine. I'm just saying for those that were really set on market rate, higher end stuff, they still need to contribute to the goal, right? And so through these kind of things, the density bonus and in lieu fees and stuff like that, you're saying, okay, you don't want to meet our objective of providing affordable housing, that's fine. You're going to then at least help us in some capacity get there. And the last thing I'll say is, I had this in the report. We didn't go into a lot of detail, but, I understand the concerns some folks may have of affordable housing and for whatever their reasons may be. But one of the things that's important is, you have a lot of service industry jobs. And so where are these people living? And I suspect through what we had shown in the report, a lot of them are coming from outside of Yellow Springs and coming here to work. So this is an economic issue too. And we didn't do any kind of detailed survey of local employers, but I bet if you did, you would find out that that is probably one of their challenges of attracting their workers, retaining workers, because they can't find affordable housing. So this isn't just a housing issue. It does impact the economy.
Yeah, I think in lieu fees could be significant. And, I do want to raise the issue that was pointed out to me that, recently several homes have been bought and flipped in town. And, if we had an ability to, support that not happening, for example, a fund, that could, be significant. I wanted to ask you, Patrick, since you're here, based on your experience, there's been some skepticism expressed about whether our older residents will actually downsize and how much we can rely on, some of this kind of conversion of housing. So I'd just like to get your experience
I'll
with
give
that.
you two answers. One would be, we're seeing that nationally, so people are making that change. There's just a point, again, they financially can't do it, or physically, they just can't maintain their yards or home. So that is happening as a national trend. But the other thing, actually maybe 2 points to make, is I believe through your focus groups that you folks did, you kind of got that feedback that is something, in fact, I think it was specific that a lot of folks had mentioned that seniors want to, that's the seniors telling you that. Yeah. And we also, through our, that survey we did with more than 500 people commented back. Now, we didn't break it out to say how many seniors were saying they would downsize, but they had to be the ones that were answering that question. We got to the point of what is it you want, what is it you're seeking? It was housing for our seniors to downsize into. So, Brian, I think the residents, who knows in the end the number, because who knows what that product's going to be. Somebody could come in with some senior-oriented housing, but the price is just so high, then seniors aren't going to come to it. So it depends on where it is, what kind of product it is, and how it's priced.
I think the issue is not that seniors aren't going to downsize. The issue is when they downsize, few of their homes are going to sell for $100,000 to $150,000. They're going to be over 150. They're going to be closer to 175 to 350. So it's still not, it's not really going to help that moderate income gap that we have.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
You're probably right, but think of housing like as a continuum, right? You saw that, all those houses and lines, right? So let's say that they leave those homes that were priced at $250,000, $300,000, or that's what they'll put their homes on the market for. Well, right now you don't have a lot of that product available. So as Patrick Bowen's income climbs, and I'm living in Yellow Springs, and I have my wife just had a baby, and we need a bigger house. I'm going to take that next house. Mine gets free. The people that make less than me are going to. So people need that housing to move in and out of. I suspect most people in this room have, moved more than once in their lifetime. And so as your circumstances change, you're going to choose something different. So the fact that these seniors could move out of a higher priced home into, again, some senior oriented housing, and they free up this stock, you have such a shortage of all types of housing, so even if it's the higher price stuff, somebody will take it, they move out of something, and there you go, the domino starts to fall. That doesn't mean no outsiders aren't gonna come in and fill that void and take that, but that's another thing you want. You want people to come to your community that fit what you seek. So.
All right. Any other questions or comments from council?
Lisa?
No, no, I don't have anything to add, but thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, cool. Patrick, you can have a seat, but I did want to see if there were any questions or comments from citizens. Sure, Anna?
Hello, Anna
Hi.
McClure. As you were speaking, something popped into my head. I just wanted to share. If it's viable or not, I don't know. But there's a big trend towards something everybody knows as tiny houses. And I don't know, I mean, it really was hitting me hard that it just seems like a lot of people that I know, even a lot of the millennials and maybe even about my age and a little bit older, are really into that kind of thing. And they don't necessarily want a bigger house, even though they have a family. They like the idea of living, in an intimate environment with a little bit of land around them. That is very appealing. So, and that kind of fits with our whole philosophy as the Village of Yellow Springs and, being green and what we stand for and everything like that. So if you have access to the glass farm, maybe that's something you could consider. That would make it affordable, A. B, it would take care of a lot of downsizing issues. C, it would also bring in multiple income levels. So.
All right, thanks. And I will say that, we've made some changes to our zoning code and encourage that otherwise. So I appreciate that comment and definitely, something that we are thinking seriously about. So thanks. Any other questions or comments? Emily Seibel?
I was waiting for you, stand up.
Hi, I'm Emily Seibel, the Executive Director of Yellow Springs Home Inc. And I'll just keep my comments brief. I think it's important that we distinguish between need and demand, because I think a lot of the recommendations were focused on capturing a little portion of the overall need. And so that makes me think that affordable housing is really important, because there are a lot of people not captured in the recommendations that are struggling in Yellow Springs with housing today. And we definitely support affordable housing, the creation of new units, investing in quality and affordability of existing units. And I think Judith already said it, but we agree that, if any new housing that is developed, another way to look at it is how the makeup of that new housing compares with the area median income of the area we're located in. And so since 50% of the people in our area are below, at 100% of area median or below, that should be reflected just as a baseline, as a minimum commitment of any new housing that's developed. I also agree with Judith that I don't think the market will do it on its own. Market rate development won't include affordability on its own, and so I think I really appreciate and support the council discussion around creating policies to ensure that affordable units are created and that affordability is furthered. And I also wanted to say that lower income households don't have as many options for housing choice as higher income households do in terms of new construction or rentals. And so that's something to keep in mind. The program that we've been running serves that 150,000 and under housing demographic. And we know for sure that, especially in our current housing market, that demographic of young starter families, for sale homes is not going to be met by the open market. I mean, it's just not. I think those days are behind us in terms of especially when you take quality and the need for repair into consideration in the purchase prices. So anyway, I think this is really encouraging that and I want to thank council and thank Patrick for putting together a thoughtful exploration of housing needs, and we certainly want to encourage the village and support the village however we can in creating new affordable housing. and preserving existing housing as affordable. So please do consider us as a supportive partner. And I guess that would be my only question to Patrick is, do you have any examples of ways that local housing groups and municipalities have worked together to develop and implement local housing policy?
Well, I think most of the communities we work with have been large metropolitan areas. I can't give any examples of direct partnerships that they've done. I just know a lot of times you know, cities have set some goals, provided the incentives, built those relationships to attract certain developers. Certainly non-profit groups have worked closely with a lot of cities, villages, much of your size, to develop affordable housing, and that's really probably the area of focus where these kind of partnerships would bring the most value. But I can't think of any cities, or communities exactly their specific relationships.
What about coordination between different developers? So let's take the
working on
glass
one
farm,
project?
for
Yeah.
example. So, depending on what that concept starts to look like, do you have any experience? Have you seen where, I guess, a group of developers have worked
No,
together on one site?
I can't think of any off the top of my head in terms of where. I know they have, I'm sure, but I just can't think of an example where it's a large enough parcel that multiple developers have come in.
Mhm.
Certainly, we could do some additional research just to find some examples of that.
Okay.
But I haven't worked on any projects like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's really going to, as we've talked about a couple of times, once we get our hands on some developers or start having some conversations with developers and getting some more realistic possibilities, I think that'll demystify what we're trying to do, I think, to a large degree.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good point. Just knowledge alone, gathering from the developers themselves. Why would they come? Why wouldn't they come? Because even if you
right.
get somebody that says, I'm not coming to Yellow Springs and here's my reasons, maybe some of those things you can solve, but maybe some of them you can't.
Right.
But at least you would learn from them is what is it that's keeping them from coming.
Right.
Those that won't.
Indeed, indeed. Yes.
All right, thanks.
Great. I think,
Yeah, okay, go ahead, Emily.
no, I was recognizing you, even though I'm not the chair. I'm not the president.
No, I was just going to say that it occurs to me that, I think most cities have dedicated staff and housing departments and full-time planners that aren't totally, their staff time is full already, not taking on any kind of affordable housing initiative. And so I guess I'm just looking for some kind of advice for Yellow Springs of how to build that capacity, to be able to network with developers and court all of those go to housing conferences, all that stuff takes a lot of time.
I think that the capacity building, I think we do need to look to Home Inc. as an integral part of how we build capacity. So I just want to throw that out there.
I just thought while we had the expert in the room, it might be helpful to hear if he
Yes, I
has
agree.
any additional insight or encouragement for us.
And I was going to say, some of the developers that Home Inc. has worked with and is beginning to work with, I think those are folks that we should be talking to about the glass farm.
I can't answer that because we don't work on staffing and their responsibilities and who takes on those roles. In addition to I can put the memo together on how to network. We can do some kind of examples of maybe how staffs are set up and how their roles play into working with the private sector, nonprofit groups and people like that.
Okay,
Okay.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anything else? Mary Ann, did you want to?
No, is there anyone else who would like to say anything? I know there's some other people there that came especially for this presentation. Well, Patrick, I think I speak for all of council and the rest of the staff and everyone here. Thank you so much for what you have done for us. Definitely beyond the call of duty, and it's very helpful. And to the degree that the work that we do can help give you examples, we will continue to be in touch with you about that.
And I would like to add, despite your, some of the misgivings, I love the quantification. I think that really helps us start to wrap our heads around, getting more concrete, from our end too, so.
Right, indeed.
The other, I know I didn't have any, I was trying to, how am I going to articulate what I'm thinking about? But what I realized, it was partly because of your last comment and what Emily said, that this isn't only a challenge for the council, for the government. This is a challenge for the whole community. Our individual citizens, our nonprofits that have different missions, and the government. And so I think an advantage of this quantification is if we can share this with our community as well, because it informs decision-making of individual citizens who maybe are trying to make a decision. So I really appreciate that too. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
And just one more thing. We're a small village, but we are starting to experience big city problems. I mean, Patrick suggested, the kinds of things we're talking about, you see it a lot in big cities. Emily just talked about, folks having dedicated staff to do certain things. Other issues that come to bear from time to time, parking and other related issues. These are big city problems, and we shouldn't shy away from them, and they're not going anywhere. So we just need to be prepared for being able to do things a bit more differently. Being small does give us, I think, the ability to be agile in how we approach things. But there's going to be a new Yellow Springs. I know we like the charm, and there's certainly some things about the old Yellow Springs we'll certainly try to keep, but Yellow Springs has never had all of these problems all together at the same time. So again, we are starting to experience big city problems, and we'll have to have some big city solutions. And that's not meant to be anything bad or negative, just different. And we may have to bring in some extra capacity that we just haven't felt the need for in the past.
Well, actually, I noticed the water brochure even referred to us as having an urban environment, so, which I pondered. All right. Yes.
Yeah, and so we're going to continue on, but if you're welcome, of course, to stay.
Continue to reach out to me, and I'll put some stuff together.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, so we're going to move into our old business, and the first item we have is going to Lisa Krieger to update us on the designated Community Improvement Corporation process.
All right, so
Oh, by the way, Devin Shoemaker, our new Greene County Regional Planning Director.
Hey.
Thanks for being here, Devin.
Thanks for coming.
All right.
If I may,
Oh, okay, yes, all right. I'll pull that back for a second, yeah.
Devin Shoemaker, Greene County Regional Planning Commission. I'm very excited to see that council's really taken affordable housing serious. I think that you're taking the right approach. Keep up the good work. We're here to help you at Regional Planning. Anytime you need us, we're there for you. I'm no housing expert, but I can tell you this: you guys are well on the right path. So keep up the good work.
All right.
And-
Thank you, Deb.
Thanks.
And I'll just add to that real quick. I was at the MVRPC TAC training, and this topic of affordable housing was actually brought up by another city manager who was there after the TAC meeting, and we got into a conversation, and this is a much wider problem. And so MVRPC is perhaps going to think about some kind of an initiative to start working on a bit more regional
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah, it's highlighted on NPR about every other day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is a problem everywhere, or an
Yeah.
issue everywhere.
Between the
Affordable housing
affordable,
does not lower values.
yeah.
Great.
Yes.
We know,
Right.
we know.
All right, thanks, man.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, and now I'm really going to pass it
Now
on
you
to
really-
Lisa.
All right, so thank you. I thought it was a nice segue when I heard mention down the road here about needing some kind of funds available to invest in buildings. I thought, oh, did someone say DCIC? So right now, the Economic Sustainability Commission really has contributed so much to our fact-finding and the documents that you've seen thus far related to the DCIC. And they took August off, though. We took August off, so just like the council did. So we don't have an additional document that we're presenting today. But right now, what we're doing is we're taking the document that was shared at the last meeting, and we're integrating that into a more formal format that looks like the Code of Regulations. And then we'll bring that back to council to read and review and provide input. So that's where we are right now. And we can talk about it at agenda planning, but I think we're scheduled for the first meeting in
Yes.
September, right?
Yes.
So we'll have a more lengthy update at that time.
And Lisa, I guess the other thing that I'm thinking about is, you know, the, I guess, more concrete outreach piece that I feel like it can run in tandem. So I guess, have you had any additional thoughts about that since we?
Well, I have a little bit. One of the concerns, you know, was this, you know, balancing the various stakeholder groups. And as we mentioned, both the school board and the township, thank you for that word, have been participating in the meeting. So it's on the radar of those entities, but we haven't scheduled any one-on-ones. And as I recall where we left it, we thought that that was something that a pair from the council should do rather than put that on members of the commission.
Yes.
And I recall that we thought it would be helpful to have a draft of the Code of Regulations as a conversation guide for those meetings.
Okay. That sounds good to me.
Is that, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think as long as we, and I think we have so far left it open enough, you know, so that, you know, that group can ultimately form some of this, I think that's important.
Right, so those meetings could presumably happen second half of September.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments about the Designated Community Improvement Corporation? Okay. So the other issue in old business is our village manager search process, and we had a document in the packet. Mary Ann, Kevin, who's gonna introduce that?
Mary Ann will.
Okay.
So, we put together a brief outline of recommendations, and it's written, so I don't think I need to go over everything. My concern was that we get this off the ground sooner than later, at least make some major decisions like what kind of process we're going to use and when we're going to start. And so I've outlined a suggestion. I think I'll just open it up for.
Yeah, you know what I thought we might do at this point is if we could just kind of hear from all council members a little bit about priorities. I mean, we've all read the document. And I don't know if anybody would like to start.
I actually
yeah.
have some questions.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
Is that okay? To start with. So, the number 4, choose 2 council members, include Judy Kittner and Patty Bates in the process, as well as community members. I didn't know what they were doing. What is this committee doing?
Well, I was not on the search committee last time, but it's my sense, having read the documents that I read, that it worked well. And I know that Judy, oh, well, it's Judy, you were on it, right? And Patty, and that.
Well, I wasn't on the committee.
No, but I mean,
I was
Ken
involved.
Crystal presumably would have been on the committee. And 2 council members. And so actually, I think someone who's on the committee could.
Brian and
I can give some insight to that, and great question. So, you know, I think ultimately the vision behind the committee was to provide capacity to both vet the process, but also facilitate the process. There were a lot of things that we needed to take ownership of, you know, versus what the consultant handled. So this was everything from helping to think about like the finalist visits and what stakeholder groups they should meet. It was helping to finalize the posting that was put out. And so they also helped to think about the community conversations that were around that. So primarily, the group was providing input to the process. And I thought that was really helpful. I mean, we even had one of our committee members ended up being the driver of the van to get people everywhere and that sort of thing. I mean, Judy, are any other things that come to your mind about where the committee had a major role?
I just think it was a really collaborative process, and I think having a group sort of at its inception, looking at have we been inclusive, have we covered all of those bases, was a pretty useful thing. You could look at it and say, gee, that looks unwieldy, but it was not unwieldy. It was actually a really useful collaboration.
Yeah, I would imagine, having gone through that process, that you had one person who just was like the logistics person, because you were getting 3 different people to 3 different places simultaneously. You know, we were moving around. Like, I would be at Sunrise having breakfast with somebody, and somebody else would be at Emporium, and somebody else would be at Dino's, and then we would all switch. And I would imagine somebody took charge of the logistics of who goes where, when, with whom.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I can't imagine that you didn't.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, since I'm talking, I'll highlight a few things that I thought were key takeaways. Probably first and foremost in my mind is that quantity-wise, it was kind of remarkable how many applicants we had. We ultimately ended up with 61 that met the minimum requirements, and my understanding is that was, above and beyond, what we had seen before. But I guess I also want to temper that with the quality of the applicants. And so a major concern I have is if we are going to, have some kind of support, a consultant or something else, I think we need to think about, are they adding value to the creative way that we post the notice for village manager. So in particular, management consultants, I mean, they are, I guess, the lead in terms of their group is all former city managers, village administrators, that sort of thing. So they are very well networked in that traditional group. But I guess I question whether that's the, I don't say we don't want to market to that group, but we need to get the word out more broadly. So that's why I would not recommend management consultants again. I thought that they helped us develop a really solid process, and so I think it's great that it looked like a good process, because I think it came out that way. But I do want us to keep in mind that council was actively involved in customizing that process to Yellow Springs. The second thing I'll say is we learned a lot about the importance of council being very actively involved. And so one thing that did come up in the process that Lori Asklund pointed out was when they did the initial vetting of those 61, she took the lead on management consultants. They sort of shortlisted for us.
Oh, okay.
But, Lori, after because we had all the resumes and everything, and she said.
They shortlisted to how many?
10-ish. And then ultimately, we brought 3 in for the final round. But, she questioned, are these really our top 10? And I thought that was a really good point. And I think that no matter what we do, especially given how important this transition is and everything that's going on, we have to be majorly involved. So we're not going to be able to, in my mind, pass on some of those things. And that probably includes, even if we have this large pool, unless we find a very targeted group that can vet that, we may have to take on that work. Or at least we should consider that. That was a lesson for me. And then I guess the third thing is, what did I wrote this down, was, I guess I feel like we learned as much as we can about how to do a really good process. So if I were going to support anything in terms of capacity, beyond what we have internally, I think it needs to be really targeted. And, whether that's like, do we hire a firm that specializes in doing social media and other background checks or something like that, things that we might not want to take on. But the quality control piece, I feel like it's going to need to fall on us. So anyway, those are my main takeaways. But I did love our process overall.
Yeah.
So I thought it was good.
I think, I was not, since I was not involved before, I wasn't necessarily beholden to this particular consulting firm, but the note in there that talks about the money that was spent before being a cap, my take was,
Before being, oh, I'm sorry.
there's a point in here about the dollar amount, $10,000.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And the reason I want to emphasize that being a cap is that, if we got what we got before for 10,000, we still have that. The process,
Right.
some of the questionnaires, the data gathering tools. And, I would think if we went through that exercise again, not many of the answers to the questions would be different than what they are now. Where they are different, we know that. I don't think we need to have consultants tell us what, last time we got these 8 big things, and we know that there's 2 more big things to add to that. So the point I wanted to make in that cap was that I don't think we need to absolutely go over what we spent before. It could probably go a lot less because we don't need as much because we're getting expert at it now. So again, I think I think the big heavy lifting that we're going to need help with is actually getting the word out to a broader audience. So that's what if we could just get that and not a whole lot more. A lot of the questionnaires and the other tools that were developed specifically for us last time, they're absolutely still relevant, and we don't need to pay a consultant to do that again.
Right.
Mhm.
Lisa?
Yeah, I agree with the theme that I'm hearing. I think the process that we reviewed is really a good process. Sounds like it worked. So I mean, I'm thinking that it's a different kind of a consultant, more a promoter or someone who, almost like a marketing kind of a skill set, to figure out how can we get the word out beyond our area, beyond our region. Time and time again, we are learning, we meet people who have come to town from areas that you say, well, where are you from? And then they name someplace really cool. And they're like, and how did you end up in Yellow Springs, Ohio? It's because it is an attractive place to live. And I think this is a terrific professional opportunity for someone, because of the size and because of, if there is an alignment of values, it would be a really great opportunity, both for someone at an experienced point in their career or someone who's maybe been working in a different setting and kind of climbing up the ladder and then realizes, hey, I want to make a jump to a smaller place and do something cool and really make a difference. So I think it's possible to maybe find someone with a high vision alignment. I think it's important to find someone who does more than just talk a good game about affordability, about anti-racism, about the values that we have in our community. I think it will be great to find someone that can actually tell us stories about work that they've done towards those kind of vision. I think it will be great if we can find someone with planning, strategic planning expertise, because I think the next 5 years there's going to be a lot of infrastructure work, there's real estate, there's a lot of things going on. So I think those are some really key skills and capabilities that I'm already starting to think about. I wish that we will find a way for us all to be involved, each to our own skill set. I understand that we have to have primarily 2 people, but there's enough work to do that maybe we can divide it up into subgroups so that we're all actively involved.
Yeah.
I did a little reflection on the main D process that we did when I was on the council was when we hired Mark Cundiff, which I also thought was a very good process. I thought, and it's not, but really what I was thinking about got at kind of a different piece of what this process is going to be than what I understand in this piece that you guys wrote, which was like, we started out thinking about the description of Yellow Springs and the job description, you know, and developing those, which we did in a public process. I mean, somebody brought the first, you know, whack at that, and we could look at those old ones. I'm sure you guys did the same thing.
Yep.
And then, you know, basically building on what's already been written in the past, and then where to advertise, where to get the word out. But the piece that I was most thinking about was the review of the applicants. And the consultant, we had a consultant, also was a, you know, village manager type person who had a lot of regional connections, as I recall. Karen's here, she went through that process. It was a lot of work. We got a ton of applicants. Lori, who was on council with the consultant, went through all those applications. They put them in like 3 different books is the way I remember it. You know, the ones and basically what the consultant did, and this was a lot of work, I'm sure, was, you know, newspaper, back then it was still more newspaper, I think, you know, basically, you know, looked into the references, you know, don't go by references, you really need to see what kind of work they did, so trying to get a deeper sense of how effective they had been in their work. One thing we considered at some point was not thinking about a village manager having to come from, you know, that background of public administrator, you know, but I don't know, I just throw that out there, it's another possibility. But then all 5 council members sat down with the consultant, and we were handed all those books, and if we wanted to pull an applicant back in that they had kind of thought was weak and we should consider, and we probably had, I don't know, how many did we reviewed, I bet 20.
There were a lot.
We had a ton.
Every time we interviewed, we have had a large number of candidates.
Yeah, we had a large number, but we had it narrowed down. I think what Lori and the consultant had narrowed down to maybe 15, maybe, or 10. Maybe. And then, but we got everybody, so we could, if any of us thought, wait a minute, you missed something there. And then we, you know, we had an interview process. We each chose a villager. Each council member just decided on their own about who they wanted to be there, that participated in some piece and gave us all feedback in executive session. They sat in on the public meetings, and we got feedback from those folks. And of course, we had the public discussions. Anyway, it seems like, so that's the piece I was more thinking about than the logistics of,
Right.
you know.
And I do want to mention, since you brought that up with the public meetings, that is again where the committee played a role, was helping to compile that information and you know, providing capacity on that level, so, okay.
Yeah,
so. Marion?
Well, I am not wedded to a process, but I am wedded to getting this started. I think we need to take the time that we need to take because we want to do a really good job. And I also can't, I mean, we're all very busy, so I can't see any one of us like saying, oh yeah, I'll lead this process, I'll do all this stuff. That's where I think we need to have some help. And I would think it would be mostly someone or organization that can target where we reach. I agree with that. So I'm not sure what the next steps are. No, I'll mention one other thing. I know Patty thought you would like to have a couple, well, you said 3-month overlap. I thought that was probably too long. Kevin thought it was too long. That's a decision that has to be made, but that's one reason why I wanted to get us started, so we have the time that is needed to have that overlap. So I'm not sure of what the next steps should be, but I was hoping that well, I think I've said what, you know, by the end of this year anyway, to have a process in place? Who's going to be working with us? Who's going to be doing it?
And the reason, I'm just gonna say, the reason that I felt like the overlap should be relatively long is because we have so much going on and getting somebody up to speed on all, I mean, I've just been sitting here writing down the different things that I'm working on and just trying to get somebody up to speed on everything and into the daily grind of, you know, the operations and the things that happen over and over that aren't even just the projects that we're working on. That was my, because, you know, the plan was to transition Melissa over a long period of time, and now we don't have that opportunity. And there are some things that only come up once every quarter or once every, you know, and it's just a matter of trying to transition that person.
Right.
So I believe in employing subject matter experts, and I think Patty is probably the subject matter expert in picking a village manager. So I suspect and would expect that Patty would certainly be part of the process, actively engaged with the process. And the two things that I think would dictate the amount of overlap are the experience of the person on one hand, and then also that last little bullet in the outline that we have here suggests that Patty develop a written transition plan. And you know, if that plan makes sense, and if it's impossible to do all that in 30 days, then that would suggest that it would have to be a little longer. So I think we take those two things. Number one, a written plan where every period, not necessarily every day, but certainly every week, you know, milestones are being met. And if it takes upwards of 3 months, well, that's where we'll need to start with our negotiations, if you will. And I'll also say, I certainly agree with all council having a role every step along the way. I did say that I'd like to be involved with the process. Someone I know has expressed interest in the position, so I might have to recuse myself at some point. But this might be our first real test of our new diversity hiring practices. So I anticipate us really having that nailed down in the meantime and employing those policies and practices to their fullest.
Go ahead, Judith.
I just had two other comments, and thank you for bringing that up. I think that's really great. I just wanted to say, Karen's sitting here, and I'm just thinking she was in both of those processes, and, you know, I don't know if, you know, she'd want to, if somebody would want to sit down with her and sort of get her, you know, take on those.
Right. Well, and
because I'm sure she has great insights.
She's our #1 citizen. We already have her name on the list.
See. Well, we also have Jerry mentioned in
yes,
yep.
yes. And then the other thing I didn't want to forget in this process is, of course, that, you know, we're thinking about the citizens, but also the staff having an opportunity. Yes. You know, that will be part of that.
Thank you.
About
yes.
that, about you know, that process when we're meeting with people. And
Yeah, I did
that
meet
was,
with every staff.
yeah, that was a
Yeah.
big part of
yeah.
the
Yeah, I knew it was. I just wanted
evaluations.
to
Yeah.
mention it, like we didn't.
Well, and I was going to ask Karen if she does want to add anything. Do you, any thoughts that you have?
I think you guys are covering it. I think
Okay.
you're doing a pretty good job of covering it. I do think you need somebody to vet the resumes and to kind of go through that initial process. And there's the issue of confidentiality up
Isn't
front.
that, could you,
Because don't forget,
Karen, could you come up here?
I wasn't sure how much you were going to say. So.
I mean, don't forget, these people, the initial resume request is these people are not necessarily going to want their bosses to know,
Yes.
their employers to know that they're doing this. So typically in that first big wide search, they're confidential, and that is how that consultant can help process that. I mean, I think that they were all good processes. I will say that the first process that you and I were involved with, Judith, that was totally citizen-led, I think was our worst. That was when we hired Eric Swanson. We weren't involved.
We were
in
not
it.
involved.
We were
absolutely.
not. But,
yeah, so when I was reading about this, when I was reading this document, that was my. I had some concern initially that it was very heavy. you know, 2 members of the council really were mainly
Right.
involved in really vetting the
But there was no
candidates.
professional help. I mean, there was no consultant help on that, and I think that they were not well vetted.
No, they were
and-
not. Do
They
you
were not
remember a
vetted
couple
at
of-
all.
Yes,
And so
there were some
I think
major
that
issues
having a
with the
professional that can do that is important.
yeah.
And I think at that point, it's probably good to keep it out of the PD, because I just think, you know, just not, I think some of it, we said, oh, well, we can just have the PD do background checks. I don't think that's a
No,
good
I don't
idea. I
think
mean,
that's
we've got to
appropriate.
keep that with a professional. So, I mean, I think that you're kind of going in the right direction. Find a way to get citizens involved, community members, and obviously there'll be a big presentation or some kind of a big public vetting of
Yeah.
maybe 2 or 3, 4 final candidates, but
All
you
right.
guys will figure it out.
Thanks, Karen. Well, we'll figure it out with a lot of support. All right, there are 3 things that resonate with me. I really like Lisa's suggestion about thinking about subdivisions, because I do think there is enough work. So that would be one next step in my mind, is figuring out what those separate pieces might be. You know, one may be the overall process itself, another might be, you know, drilling down on this, you know, placement, promotion, that kind of piece. I haven't thought that all the way through. The second thing is I really like Kevin's suggestion about Patty developing a transition plan, because I have to be honest, I'm not a big fan of a long transition period, primarily because it would concern me, not that you don't have a lot of knowledge to deliver, but if we can't find a person who's ready to hit the ground running, I'm gonna be concerned, because we have so much to do. And you figured it out pretty quickly. I mean, you did not, I mean, remember, you know, our interim village manager was out the door, so you were pretty much on your own. He was done. And then the last thing is, I guess I really want to figure out, if I'm going to get on board with, you know, some kind of consultant support or whatever, I want to really know what it is we need, all right? And to me, I'm thinking, I mean, yeah, if we can find someone who's creative about placement, and I know we had a conversation with Gavin, and he suggested there may be a consultant out there. I'm just not convinced that they are, but, you know, maybe they are. But to me, it could be more just sort of like, I don't want to say grunt work necessarily, but not this higher level kind of stuff. So those to me are next steps that I think we could figure out in the next month.
So who's going to figure those things out?
See?
We were doing so good.
I'm willing to work on this some. I don't feel like I'm an expert, but
How did we, yes, I'll definitely,
Well,
get together
Yeah.
and have.
I'm happy to work with you in whatever capacity I can.
yeah, so, yeah, Patty, I think again, as a subject matter expert, I mean, the point is, you know, who are these folks? You know, what is the pool of people that we can go to in terms of finding consultants?
All right, well, let's figure out, why don't we figure out like how we divide the work with the subcommittees first, bring that to the next meeting, and then we can allocate work from there. All right?
Okay.
Because I think, yeah, I think there's a role for all of us to play in this, you know, first
And
piece.
if someone else wants to work with Kevin, who thinks they have ideas about this, I'm happy that.
I'm willing to as a way for me to get deeper into understanding the process, I'm willing to go back to the process documents and see if by looking at those, some categories of work pop out that could be divided. There's no right or wrong answer, but I'm willing to do that, and then I'll email that to you and Kevin.
Or to Patty.
Yeah,
Or
email
to
it to
Patty.
me.
Okay.
Well, and as a pre sort of task, Patty and I can get on our various resources to gather information about consultants that various municipalities have used, what they thought about them, and then a first group might be to actually vet the consultants before you even jump to the next steps.
And there are several, I mean, well, you know, you use Management Partners for the one
Right.
that I was involved in. There there are several firms that are the ones who generally people go to their websites regularly to look. And then there are certain places where you advertise that if you ask them to advertise for you, they just put them on these places automatically, so.
I mean, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure that gets us to where we want to go, because you already kind of vetted, didn't you kind of vet the potential consultants the last time, and this was in terms of.
Right, we did
Yeah.
look at that.
And, I mean, and I think our guy was from MBR.
Yeah, no, he wasn't. He was
MVCC, wasn't he?
Don Vermillion.
Oh, Don Vermillion, that's
Yeah.
true. I was thinking it was MVCC.
Yeah.
Okay, but, I don't know, do you think it's, I mean.
Well, I like Lisa's offer, and Lisa, we could get together before the next meeting, and I could give you, I kind of wrote down 3 categories, but as we were talking about this. But you know, I'd like to see what you get out of that. And then since Kevin and Mary Ann have thought about this, and I know Judith's got experience with past processes, I think we could all look at that, and then we could lay down some action steps, all right?
But I was just gonna say, but I hate for staff to do work if, you know, if we don't wanna sort of go our standard direction.
Well-
Anyway, until we're sure that's a sensible.
Well, let's not do that until our next meeting.
Yeah.
Because we will need to figure out this, what do we need in a
So-
consultant?
So,
Well, I
The-
mean, I don't, seems to me, having Judy and Patty, I mean, I think, what were you saying, Judy? That the two of you could look at potential consultants and see if you thought some might be
Well,
better than
I mean, what
others?
we can do is, I mean, I've got a clerk networking group, Patty's got her village manager,
Okay.
her manager's networking group, and you can throw out an email blast that says, we're looking for, you know, we're
Yeah,
particularly interested in
I'd like
people
for
who
you
can
to
do
do that.
this.
I mean,
Yeah, I
we're
think
all-
that
But
goes-
Judith's, but I think Judith's just saying, like, I mean, we could give them some, you know,
Input that would
direction
help.
to do that. And we're only gonna have to wait 2 weeks
right,
for our next meeting.
so,
What kind of direction, what are you
Well, I mean, this,
talking about?
what do we need, right? Because, I mean, Judy was just saying, you know, she could say, all right, we're looking for, so, I mean, we're looking for a non-traditional support, I think, you know, and so, but I think we could outline some things that could, you know, direct that inquiry.
well, here's a bullet point. Mary and I talked about what was done before and what it cost us before. Then if you go back to the same people, you expect it not to be any more, perhaps less. Where are we with the $10,000, and is that a cap when we start looking at other people? Crickets.
I'm less concerned about if it's 10,000 or 15,000, not
Okay.
getting what we need.
All right.
That-
That's I guess that's my hesitation too. I
Right.
mean, you know, is what are we gonna get?
Well, I'd say, yeah, put the feelers out, let's see what comes in, get some ideas. And like I said, if it's 12 to 15, but we're getting a lot of bang for the buck, let's not sweat it.
Well, I mean, and I'm happy to do whatever council needs me to do in this process. Just keep in mind, I'm on vacation next week. I'm back for 4 days. I'm on vacation. I'm back for 2 weeks to go to the conference, so.
Well, I'm not sure if we have consensus, but my feeling is that we need to give you guys a little bit more direction.
Okay.
Because I think just sort of
Yeah,
saying,
that's-
who do you
that's-
know?
that's what I say, don't- I
You
would
know,
want-
without being able to, like, you know, if you get questions
Do
back
we
or
want to
whatever.
target this specific area or community or, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
Right, I mean, it's kind of like an RFP process.
Right.
You guys come up with, here's what we want to get, and
Right.
you see what's out there kind of deal, yeah.
all right. So this will be on our next
Good
agenda.
analogy.
Okay, so I'm not clear who's going to be doing what. I'm
So-
not asking staff to look into it.
We're not asking staff
So
to
you
look at
guys are gonna
anybody.
talk.
Brian
Brian
I are
and
gonna-
Lisa are going to
right.
get together and think about subgroups.
What the pieces are of the process and how we might divide that work. You know, so like there's the communications piece, there's the process piece, there's the interviewing piece. I mean, I've already kind of thought about like who I think might focus on different areas. So then we all have, we share that work. And then the other thing we need to decide is what we need from a consultant.
Right, and I think that could map to the,
Yeah.
And
to
so
the
who's
categories.
gonna do that? When's that gonna happen?
Next meeting as
Yeah,
well.
we'll work
We're
on that.
all, I mean, we'll tee that up, but
You and
we
Lisa.
need, but we need all council to think about what you want out of a consultant.
And then, is there any reason for Brian and Kevin and I to meet with Patty? Or you guys?
Not until after the next meeting.
One thing that Patty could think about, I think, is the transition.
Yes.
I wrote it down already.
Yep. That can
It'll be on
Now
my
you have to- all you have to
list
do is
of
do it.
to-do things.
See?
Okay, so I'm
Awesome.
not doing anything. Well, thinking.
Isn't that good?
Yes, we're all thinking.
You're
Yes.
such a great thinker.
And I appreciate you guys summarizing this. So, okay, are we ready for new business?
Yes.
Okay, good. So Judith, do you want to tee up the surveillance technology proposal?
Yeah, and I think from here forward that we should call this something slightly different, because I don't think citizens are going to understand what that is. And I had suggested Justice System Task Force recommendation regarding community control over police surveillance, which is the title of this report by the ACLU. I want to thank Steve and Ellis. I warned them it was going to be 9 o'clock, but they came early, and I said, but maybe you better come a little early. Anyway, the timing, timing's pretty good, but I guess I wanted to say, I accidentally did not get this in this piece in the packet until I sent it out over the weekend. I realized I had sent the wrong thing. So if you guys want to say a few things about this, that would be great, or somebody should, I think. So, and I'm willing to if you're not planning to.
There is a lot in the packet.
There is a lot in the packet, but this is a great summary, I think, of the purpose of this ordinance. So do you want to do that, Ellis, or should I, or Steve, or?
I think Steve was going to begin by just talking about the reason for this, and then I thought I could sort of
Okay.
summarize what it does.
Okay. And just one little other item. No, you can stay up there. Oh, yes, you can. Let me give you a different copy, because I wrote on that one, and I kind of wanted to keep it. Do we have an extra? Yeah. I just want to say that, this has come up before, and I really appreciate that Ellis kind of really saw how important this was when we sent the proposal to the staff. Chris Connard, our legal counsel, commented on how forward-thinking this recommendation is, and how important it is to really protecting our civil liberties. And just to say, I know a few years ago we had a small conversation in the community when there was the plan to put cameras in public spaces where particularly youth hung out. And there's always a trade-off. There was this idea it would keep things safer, but then you think about your own youth and your want for privacy and to have some spaces where you can hang out with your friends. And so that's so I think it's, given the way the technology is evolving, this is really a very important proposal. So thanks for your work on it. I'll let you guys go.
Hello, Steve McQueen, Justice System Task Force. So we started a committee on the task force involving surveillance, and it started with some of your more common uses for it. So body cameras, I think, would probably be the most prevalent one that people speak of the most when it comes to police use of surveillance. So obviously a store having a camera is not what we're talking about here. However, somewhere that the police would like it for their use, this is what we mean. And so the ACLU put out something here that I'm sure people have gathered, where there's some very interesting technology out there, and we wanted to sort of get in front of before anyone would want to use this technology, to sort of say, well, before you do that, could you come to the community, explain what it is that you'd like to use, and have council sort of go over it and see if that's even you know, if it's not explained well enough, or have a better reason, something along those lines, but that this way that people get to hear about it as well as council, and then do we want to spend that sort of money on something like that? You know, we are talking about radar through walls sort of technology that's there. Clearly, that's not going to be something we would need. However, we did want to make sure that once in a while there are emergencies. A really good example would be the license plate reader. That has been a major reason why they've been able to catch kidnappers who usually take their own kids. When they have their license plates, that's been like the #1 reason they've been able to gather people very quickly. And so the question is, if that were used here, would this be, and say it again?
It is used here, isn't it?
It doesn't work.
We have it, but we don't, right.
We don't use it, yeah, we've never, do we have one? Yes. Do we operate it?
Oh, I thought.
Right, but sometimes county to county, township to township, another place may use it here. That would still also have to be justified under this. So we have it all worked out to where we've made sure that basically, yeah, if surveillance of any use that would be something that would invade people's privacy, we would want it to be discussed here at council.
So, Steve, can I just ask a quick question?
Sure. That's what-
So you're saying that, say, if the Greene County Sheriff had a plate reader and one of their cars went through town, that they would not be able to use it?
No, that they would, but that they would have to explain to you why they used it and what they were using it for, because it was used in this jurisdiction. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I bet he could say that a lot better than I. But I just wanted to go over the thoroughness in which we went and asked every single question around it. Yeah, once again, I have a feeling the legalese would be.
Well, before you sit down,
Yes.
and I have two questions. So the way I read this is there's no grandfathering, right? Any current use has to be reviewed, right? There was something about like within 120 days.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think we're more prepared to. Yeah, that's correct. Any current use, you'd have to come in 120 days and present it, just as you would a new use, and council would have the right to.
And it is any village entity, right? So we're talking about existing cameras in the building and everything, right?
Can you just go backwards and kind of start from the beginning? I'm
Yes.
totally lost on.
So, I mean, here's the general idea is that this technology, the sorts of technologies that Steve mentioned, are just becoming ubiquitous, and they're really cheap. And there are a lot of entities out there that are pushing it on police departments. And so you can barely open the newspaper without finding a story about a police department using drones or mass networks of surveillance technologies to spy on people and collect a lot of data on folks. And so the simple idea here is this. This ordinance doesn't judge any of that technology. It doesn't say this is good, that's bad, whatever. It simply says if you want to use it, you got to tell the council about it, have a public hearing on it, and give people the ability to decide, yay or nay. Do we want to use that in our village? Are we going to acquire that technology? So if the village wanted to get a drone and put a camera on it, that would come to you first, and you'd get to say yay or nay. And the key thing is, attached to the proposal that we buy is this is how we want to use it. Okay, so Steve's really good example of the automatic license plate reader, which you're right, doesn't work, so we're not using it, but let's pretend it does work for a second. They might come to you and say, we have an automatic license, we'd like to buy an automatic license plate reader, and we just want to use it for Amber Alerts. Okay? Put it out on the street, program in, this is the license plate we're looking for, see if that car drives through town. And you might say, yeah, that's great. Or they could come to you and say, buy an automatic license plate reader, put it out on the street, gather the license plate of every car that drives through town and keep it in a database for 3 years. And you might say, nah, we're not quite sure that makes any sense. And so that's how this idea works. Now, I don't mean to disagree with Steve, but I don't think it would apply to any other jurisdiction using stuff in the village. It wouldn't, in fact. All this is strictly aimed at the village entities acquiring this sort of technology.
And can I add one thing, in terms of what's the problem with all this technology, with, getting all this information, catching crooks and all this kind of stuff? And I think, while there's certain constitutional issues that it's significantly, are significantly raised, but also they tend to be used in particular neighborhoods, in particular environments, and so if you think about it that way and kind of the impacts that can happen, particularly on communities of color, low-income communities, politically active communities, and we see what's kind of going on in our politics these days, and how this could go greatly wrong. So I just wanted to say that.
So, and we're not saying that there's a problem. We don't think there is a problem with this in Yellow Springs. But the stuff is just, it's coming, and the idea is you should get out ahead of it and just create this process that says, bring it to us, let us make sure that we have an appropriate policy in place. That's what it's all about, getting the right policy in place for these sort of technologies. The technologies lend themselves to abuse because they're just so powerful. They just are. I mean, the city of Dayton was looking at this idea. You may not even believe this. They were approached by a group called Persistent Technologies that wanted to put a airplane in the sky over the city of Dayton with a really high-resolution camera on it that could literally photograph the entire city of Dayton at such detail that you could zoom on any point in the city at any time, and it would be basically a movie camera of everything going on in the city. So if there was a crime committee, you could play the tape back. Oh, look, see that guy being robbed? Let's play the tape back and see where he lived in the morning, where he left from in the morning. There's that technology actually exists. There's a group they're in Vandalia. They wanted the city of Dayton to do that. It leaked out, and so the city of Dayton had to have a public process to decide whether we wanted to do it. But the approach to the city was, hey, let's just pilot this in the city of Dayton. Baltimore piloted it without telling anybody. So you would have an ordinance in place that would create a process that would make sure nothing like that happened. I think it should be an ordinance because it's very specific. It puts specific requirements on the police department. It creates specific standards for the village council to use when judging these sort of applications, these sort of proposals. And when the police department comes to you and says, we want to have a license plate reader to do Amber Alerts, they would bring it as a policy. And so the policy then gets sort of appended under your ordinance, if you will. Policy goes in the policy book, you look at it, but your ordinance sets up the rules for adopting these policies.
Yeah, I would just like that. Remember the SWAT team, Ace Task Force, and sort of how they started with these. We need this because we want to do this. By the time we were talking about it, we actually do this and that as well. And so once again, jumping out ahead of that, this concept, we didn't even realize you were doing that. 2 years ago, you said this. And so this is also to sort of make sure that there isn't this, we just really didn't. We forgot to tell you that we can also do this with that technology or this sort of thing, or we didn't think you'd mind, or the important thing is results, that sort of argument to be used. This would be able to sort of, you come with us and, let us discuss, and we'll discuss results in those things, decisions like that, versus someone making them for the town.
Well, and I want to say that the task force went through the process that we've adopted, which is that these guys worked out an initial proposal. It went to notice and comment. We did get comments from staff, and that was integrated. I mean, the problem of an emergency, Patty raised that question, and Ellis edited it. And then the committee supports this. Was it unanimous?
It was unanimous, yeah.
It was unanimous, yeah, I thought it was.
Which is a rare thing for us to say about the task force.
So I just have two clarification questions, because during the conversation you said drones, okay? And I get what you were talking about, the use of drones, but one thing that the village staff has actually been working on is a drone to find hot spots in our electric system. It's not a drone that surveils any type of personal movement or license plate or anything. It strictly would be fitted to find the hot spots that we need to repair in our electric system. Is that still something that
would have an infrared item on it
yes,
then, I guess?
Yes.
Then I don't think it would fit the definition of surveillance technology. I'd have to, Patty, since you just raised that, let me think about it some
Yeah.
more, but I don't think that fits the definition.
Okay.
The purpose is in surveillance technology is collecting digital data about individuals, people.
Right, right. And then the other question that I had was, because, you know, another thing that we've talked about is we had a burglary at one of our facilities. And we've talked about putting cameras there. We've never done it yet, but, you know, it's just one of our facilities and it was a burglary. And so, then we had an attempted burglary,
So I don't think those sorts of things would be covered under.
I'm just
this-
trying- yeah.
I don't think they're considered surveillance technology if they're stationary and in a village building.
Okay, because because the cameras in this building, I mean, I think that was something that somebody just raised, maybe Brian.
Yeah, that is, now that I guess we've gotten the background, that's my question as well. Because when I read this, maybe I've missed some kind of definition that clarifies that, but
Right.
to me, it reads as,
Everything.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the effort is to come up with a definition. We can work on the, you know, the 5 points of the definition. If there's specific things you want to make sure are in or out. The idea is to have something that's not too broad, not too narrow, and that's evergreen, if you will. Something that's, you know, general enough that it will evolve with the technology and will be applicable as this technology changes in
Yeah.
ways we can't imagine.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to, because given what you said and what's written in the ordinance, I'm just trying to see, to clarify for myself more than anything.
And I think an approach is to have a list of exceptions, an explicit list of exceptions, so that it is a matter of law, if you will, as opposed to a matter of opinion. When the next person comes along and, well, in my opinion, you know, this does or doesn't apply. But I think, you know, like this last statement, any technology and existing uses that are not expressly approved pursuant to the blah, 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 community-focused processes. I mean, certainly, looking for hotspots, you know, in the electric grid, that's a community focus, and it does get grandfathered in.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, so what we've talked about then is we need to clean up the definition. Because when I look at the definition of surveillance technology here, I mean, I think Patty's question, I mean, that's something that captures data. Because it can pick up a hotspot.
Yeah, but it's.
Or
well,
intercepting. I mean, it can do something, monitoring. I mean, so, but I will say, you know, just to cut to the chase, I think the concept is good. I mean, I think it makes sense for us to be, you know, proactive in evaluating these things. And I agree that we can, you know, make this what we want it to be. So,
I think Chris has something.
yeah, I know.
And then I was going to say, then, too late for JSTF to consider, there was then a second question about the resolution/question ordinance. When it came to the committee, we had gotten the original thing that Chris had sent out, sort of leaving the question open. And then it's really raised the question for me, you know, how do we make these decisions? But there was a sense that it was a weightier, that an ordinance, it has more weight, it sits in the ordinance book. And I was talking to Brian about, you know, where do the resolutions sit? And I'm not sure where they sit. So anyway, but, so that question has been brought up by staff. And, but the JSTF did not have an opportunity for that second concern to come to it.
So I know Chris is going to want to weigh in on that. Do any council members have questions for Steve or Ellis at this point? Other questions? Okay, Chris, you guys can have a seat for a minute if you want.
I'll start with the ordinance versus resolution question. You know, that's really not a legal issue per se. I mean, it's part of the policy discussion of the policy you're discussing, so I'm going to call it policy on policy. We addressed that a little bit in the TASER policy, where we did that as a resolution, but put language in that so that it couldn't change without coming to council first. So I think that's really up to council on how you want to handle that. I'll say as a general thing, it's kind of fascinating to me because when I look around this room, we start talking about privacy matters. Many people here probably remember when privacy was you'd write a letter to somebody. You know, my kids certainly have no appreciation for privacy in the context of how people of a certain age view it. And while I think that we can expect that the courts will slowly adapt to it, I mean, so for example, when you have Chief Justice Roberts commenting that a cell phone is a modern-day wallet, that suggests that there's some level of recognition that this technology, it carries privacy information. The problem is that who knows when the courts are going to react to it. I can't even predict, and I think Ellis would agree if that'll be in our lifetimes. So I think that eventually these things will be addressed. That was one of the concerns that I raised in the email, is that I think everybody needs to understand that we may have this policy, but as the law, both nationally and locally, there could be aspects of it that get preempted. And I'll go back to about 6 years ago when we passed the anti-fracking ordinance. That was, by definition at the time, something that's contrary to state law. So I think people have to understand that in an evolving world, what we do today may have to be revisited over time. But I think as a general proposition, I mean, anybody who's got any concerns about privacy, I mean, what's out there, it's got to scare the hell out of you. The one thing that I don't understand is Section 9 on penalties. It doesn't make sense to me that we would put a penalty in against village employees. And it's written in such a way that it says any person who knowingly violates this act. If the policy is only directed towards law enforcement, that seems to me to be too broad. So I'm not sure why we would have a penalty section in there that essentially criminalizes a violation of the policy. That's not something that I would expect. Two, the definition is too broad when it says any person, and I would suggest that we probably want to remove that, because I think that we'd have an expectation that once the policy's in place, that those who the policy applies to would be aware of what they need to do. The last thing is that Patty did raise the issue of emergency, and maybe I missed it where it got inserted in there. Because in that context, there could be some situations that I think we would all recognize there would be an urgent need that you don't have time to get the approval. I also have some type of concern, and this is not a fully formed thought yet, but when there are these joint enterprises of law enforcement, not through a task force, but because of some urgency of what the investigation is. We had the double homicide on the outskirts of the village, and there's cooperation. You know, I could see another police agency using surveillance technology that may or may not have been approved or wouldn't be approved within the village, and I think that that's another area that we have to acknowledge could exist. So as I understand this discussion, it's really within what I would call the boundaries, the jurisdiction of Yellow Springs, and what our intentions are. And frankly, what happens if an outside agency, and I'm going to presume that this is done legally, comes into the village for a legitimate purpose using some technology that otherwise wouldn't be approved. So I'll stop there.
In terms of that, one thing we wouldn't want is for our staff to ask them to come in to kind of.
Well, we wouldn't want them to do an end around.
To do an end around this, so I don't know. But anyway,
right. But I think that
I mean, that might be some.
The necessity becomes I think everyone here would acknowledge that there could be circumstances, sometimes some we can think of, some that we can't, that would be legitimate exercises.
Well, but I think the way it's worded now, it refers to any village entity.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as we're consistent about that, but I mean, then I guess there's this other issue if we're trying to, do something else. But right now, it seems to read, we just got to be consistent that it's applying to us, like, you mentioned.
But I do think we maybe should have some language in there saying, because I wouldn't want to see that happen, where staff would say, if there's some cooperative relationship, we can't do it, but bring you guys in.
That's exactly what I was addressing, but I was saying.
I mean, not that they wouldn't, not to be requesting that.
Well, right, but if the Amber Alert wasn't here, and they called it out, and someone had to go through, the thing is, yeah, but I
okay.
This is what I mean, we have been very thorough. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
get you to stand
Oh,
up.
you can't hear me. I'm
Right,
sorry.
yeah, if you've got something more substantive than agree, then we need you at the mic. But Lisa, go ahead.
Well, I'm on that same thread that you're talking about. Is it reasonable? I mean, I agree that the technologies are going to evolve in ways that we can't possibly imagine, faster than we can imagine, and they're going to be cheaper than we think. And so I'm also wondering if we're casting that broad enough net, is it possible that commercial entities who are just even trying to make money, you know, for-profit entities would want to use these kind of technologies to gather data about consumers in our community, which would have the same risks to their privacy. Is that something we should be thinking about?
I'll stand next to Alice.
Like, what if a company came in and decided to do market research by
Lisa, I
using
think
drones?
you've opened a whole separate can of worms.
Sorry.
This is strictly really aimed at the village, you know, the governmental
Okay.
entity that acquiring this technology and using it. Strictly that. That would be a whole separate issue, which could be addressed, but I think it's a whole separate conversation.
So then I would say we do need to tighten the language to make that clear, more consistent throughout. I get your point then.
Hopefully it is, but I mean, maybe not. The emergencies are addressed. Patty, you suggested it. You'll find it at section 12. So there, we drafted an entire section.
This is
Going-
This is my copy.
There's two
Oh, so
copies
you
there,
got-
because I accidentally put the.
Yeah,
So you
it's,
got the
it's,
three-
it's in there, Chris,
Okay.
it's section 12.
And then the end around issue is addressed in section 11.
Oh, cool.
Where we try to get to that idea that you can't come up with some agreement to get around it. We can't keep other
Yes.
governments who have
That's a
jurisdiction
separate, yeah.
here,
Right.
coming here and using stuff they own. They can do that. But what we can say is we can't do an end around where you come up with some agreement to get them to come in and do something you can't do, that the village council told you you couldn't do. And so we've tried to do that. I think the language does that, but take a look at it and see if you think it
My
does.
initial read looks pretty good. Lisa, on your question, is that the general proposition is that when the government entity wants to create certain limits and commercial speech has its, or commercial activity has a certain level of protection in terms of, and as does individual liberty, the likely standard would be is that you'd have to show that there was some type of compelling state interest, whether you could get there or not. I mean, that's a
So where I
complicated
fell off the rail is not putting the word government entity in between
Yes.
village entity, thinking that like if a business was incorporated in the village, is that a village entity? So it was just me not understanding that term, village entity.
Well, if we capitalize the V.
Yeah.
And then if council, and I guess I would ask council today, if, in terms of an action item, is to give some sense of if you want to look at this continued as an ordinance or a resolution. Because if it's an ordinance, I would suggest that we put create more than one section, what would be, because we got to figure out where it's going to go into our codified ordinances, if that's what we're going to do. And then I would create a series of maybe 3 or 4, I don't know, separate code sections, starting with a definitional section, the way you would typically see it in our code book, just to conform to the form, and plus it's easier to read, where you've got that, well, I'll just say 291901 definitions, and then 02 has a statement of the policy, et cetera, but those are things that Ellis can do in his sleep.
I was going to say, Chris could do that.
We could work together and get it done, but with the direction that we get from council.
Okay, well, I think we've had a pretty good discussion. I don't want to prolong this too much longer, but are there any final questions, concerns? And I guess I'll ask if citizens want to comment as well. So anything from council?
Well, the decision of whether it's a resolution or
Well,
an ordinance.
yeah, we'll talk about that, but I just mean anything else about the content of the policy. Okay, and any comments or questions from citizens? Okay, so let's discuss the,
Well, I think we need our people on board.
Yeah.
yeah, so, okay, so then there is this piece of, yeah, resolution or ordinance. Well, I'll just jump in and say that I have pondered this for a while, and I think it's good to bring up, like, where do these resolutions go? And I think it's a discussion that we do need to have at another meeting. But that makes me think that we should think about things that we want to really be policy to be codified. So that's my initial.
Can I say one more
Yes.
thing? Because it's what we did again with the TASER policy, I think that became embedded in the police policy manual.
Right.
If this is indeed a policy that would only go to the PD, one could make that argument that the same thing for the
Right.
resolution. Again,
Right.
I don't make an opinion one way or another.
But I still feel like in that situation, we technically codified it because, we put it in the operation manual.
Correct.
Right.
But in terms of public knowledge, it's still a public document that people get copies of, but it's not as readily accessible through the website because American Legal publishes our codified ordinances. So that's a factor to consider.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, I would like to see it be an ordinance, and like I say, JSTF did weigh in on this because there was a sense that it's a more weighty, secure policy. But I think it's a bigger question that we should, in terms of how we are generally doing it, because, and then there's the question of, what should happen to the resolutions that we don't want to lose, I mean, I don't know exactly how that, actually, probably.
We're losing resolutions, but I'm not quite.
Well, I mean, okay, so you can grab our big code book and you can flip through and find it. I mean, where do our resolutions, do they live in some?
They live in the permanent files, yes.
Right, which nobody can find on the website. And so I mean, I think these things get lost. And, so a great example would be, and again, I don't want to go too far down this path tonight, but if we think about dig once policy, right? I mean, we don't have anything in our code that specifically says, this is a step in there. And so.
But there are a lot of things that you may put in ordinance form, but they do not become codified. Not every ordinance is codified.
Okay.
There are those that are codifiable and those that are not codifiable. So, the solution to that might be to spend a little chunk of money and have a firm come in and, scan in every single resolution that exists and make it readily available. There are firms that do that.
Right.
So, I mean, it's something to consider because you can't guarantee that an ordinance will be codified.
Right, so I think we're on the same page, right? Which is that the problem is these things get lost in the shuffle.
Well, and then the organization of the resolutions, are they just organized by date of the resolution? But if you're trying to find particular ones about particular subjects, are they?
Well, it's kind of like you have a clerk, because you say, I need this resolution, and then.
You always find them.
You can go, I mean, you can get a lot of things that online, but if it's prior to a certain time, it's not accessible because they weren't scanned in. I mean, you kind of have to do the go to the source and say, I'm looking for this, and usually you have it.
Yeah, but it's a good idea, I think, to think about bringing somebody in and having it organized in a way that the community, we wouldn't have to be asking you every time it actually could be found because it was.
Well, and
Well,
we
no,
can't.
you'd still have to come in. It'd be a massive amount of data that you could come in and get on a computer and look up what you wanted to look up, or you could call and say, I want this looked up. You couldn't probably get that online. I don't know that for certain, but it's a lot of
Well, I mean, I remember not too long ago, we passed a policy, and then Melissa found that we had passed a policy that was contrary to that several years before. And, I mean, it happens a lot. But I think the point is, we agree we need to have a discussion about it, and we maybe have different thoughts, but, we also need to utilize our technology appropriately. So it sounds like there's agreement that we will move forward with this as an ordinance. Is that okay? Kevin?
Yeah.
Okay. And obviously, we need to discuss a version that comes forward that's a little bit more tightened up with some of the issues that we talked about. Are there any other comments on
I
this?
think the next step could be the first reading with it tightened up, correct?
I think so.
And who's doing that? So you're going to work with
Well, I think if
Ellis?
Ellis and I can work together, if you can repeat that from here. I'd love an opportunity to work with Ellis. If you can work with
Nice. Okay, well, that kind of segues into, I'm going to go to the topic that I asked to add, and I wanted to ask for clarity about the notice and comment on this. So, Judith, you said that this went through notice and comment?
It did, yeah.
The public process too? So what are we putting in the paper, Judy, that you sent an email about today?
Well, there were two different,
It's not about this?
no,
No.
Okay.
That's done already. That was
Okay.
done.
this is done.
Well, there's just, we've got a million topics, so what is that we?
So the next, what, if you, can I just say, let's see. So there's two things, yeah, and that's part of when, so, you know, I put this work, the Justice System Task Force workforce, the work topics that we prioritize that we're trying to get done by the end of the year. And I wanted to think about it relative to council meetings and how we're going to fit these things onto our agendas. But also, there's this notice and comment piece. And Patty had just said to me, Chief, so because we wanted to make sure we got the comments of staff as part of what we were considering before we made a recommendation. So it's putting some work on staff. And so the two that are coming up are, this came from the Police Working Group regarding a civilian review board. And then the second one is the Mayor's Court recommendation number 2, which Chris has already commented on. I got an email, I think we got an email today, regarding establishing a diversion and restorative justice program, which really, is about a prosecutor.
Right.
And so.
And that's the one that.
So those are the two that we made decisions on, and so we have decided we wanted to do that notice and comment unless we decided in a particular instance it was not necessary. But on these two, so that's been, so that's where we are.
Okay. So I guess I want to clarify, and that's why I'd rather address this topic first about recommendations. So with notice and comment, I guess I'm a little bit unclear, like, is it always staff and public, or?
Yes. I mean, I guess there could be situations where, we send it to the chief. Actually, I was going to check in with Judy because we generally have it go to the chief, Patty, Chris, and the mayor, if it's to do with.
What about council members?
Well, we usually, before we get the final recommendation. Yeah, I don't know that it's gone to council at this point.
Because I have comments on some of these.
On both of those, okay.
Okay. So
it should go to, that's fine.
Right.
There was no intention to exclude the council.
Okay, so Patty, go ahead.
So I guess the concern that I have about the way that if you're doing it all at the same time is that I thought when we discussed it before that what we were going to do was let staff and the solicitor have the opportunity to comment before you went out for public comment, because if we have significant changes, what you're putting out for public comment isn't going to be the final draft.
It's not the final one.
So then you would need to publicly notice it again if it's.
No, well, mainly, I thought we have public discourse here, and that's where the final one comes. And, because otherwise, these process would get just drug out so long. We've had some problems with that, or the committee's gotten frustrated with that. So, yeah.
Because that, if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong, but you put out the TASER policy before staff had seen it, and then we, had significant changes, which we were able to iron out and sit down, and figure those out. And so I thought that staff and the solicitor were gonna have the opportunity to look at the policies and offer comment before it went out.
Quite honestly, we're not getting much back from the public. It gives the public an opportunity to come to our meetings and be part of the discussion, or to come to this meeting, but the public, we're getting very minimal response.
So you're looking to do it jointly, just as kind of a time saving, moving things along?
It's just that they got finished, and the committee, so if we look at the work topics, as you see, there's a lot. And this, some of these, tonight we talked about, the surveillance question, and we made a decision, and it's going to an ordinance, and there'll be 2 more opportunities for the public to comment after it's edited a little bit more. But, you know, some of these, so, you know, it's going to come back in September as an ordinance. In the September, we had agreed the second meeting, the Justice System Task Force, the Justice System Commission proposal would come with the idea that we didn't want, you know, the JSTF is ending at the end of the year, and we were hoping the commission would be in place to then take up the work. And then Pat DeWeese has written a biannual report, which was to introduce, you know, to help us, you know, which is a report on what the Justice System Task Force has done. So it's a 2-year report. So that would be presented in September, except that I think Pat is away. But I think the biannual report, I mean, we've been saying that we were going to have this proposal, which Brian and I are working on regarding a Justice System Commission. And it seems so. So anyway, there's just, as you can see, there's a lot of items that people are trying to finish up, and how we're going to put those onto our agendas, get the comments from the staff, you know, notice and then re-look at them. It's just a lot. The committee felt, you know, they narrowed down really to what they saw as the top priorities, and of course the mayor's court. So really, you know, there's some weighty issues here.
Okay, well, Lisa was waiting to make a
I'm
comment,
sorry.
and then Mary Ann.
I think I lost track of what I was going to say.
Okay, Mary Ann?
Well, I have concerns about some of these things. And I really would like, or would have liked, to have had some of these things come to council as they're being considered. For example, the Citizen Review Board. I mean, I've read, Pat, I know, just a friend of mine, has done a lot of work on looking at this. And from her report, having a Citizen Review Board would be very, very difficult for Yellow Springs to do. So I'd like to be able to have a little more interaction between council and the Justice System Task Force, and have people go off and do things and work on things and then come back, and like has happened with Planning Commission, and they got very pissed. Planning Commission worked on the accessory, or on the Airbnb thing, and then came here, and then we said, no, we don't want it. So I would like more interaction, because I also have concerns about some of the stuff that we're laying on the police, laying on the mayor's court, when I think both are still sort of like working to just do what they're trying to do. And so I'd like for some of these things to come to council and say, hey, we're thinking about this, there's this and this. Does council have input before just plowing ahead on things?
Well, it's comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Well,
You want to
we
know?
didn't ask. I mean, none of these things have been directed directly by council. So I think if you're going to be working on things, I'd like for them to come to council and have some discussion before.
Yeah, the Civilian Review Board, just to be clear, is not recommending that we have a Civilian Review Board. It's basically saying there is a lot of citizen interest, and that we should look at it. That's pretty much what it says. It's not, I mean, that we should set up a special committee to look at what would be, and it also gets at the question of if the, you know, what's the process for complaints?
I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? That if you're
I
going
do,
to
but
go
I-
off on working on something that people spend a lot of time working on, to come to council and say, hey, we're thinking of doing this, what do you think?
Well, but most of this actually has come from council, I have to say. The Justice System Commission, we've been knowing, we're going to talk about that. The Civilian Review Board is an exception. The mayor's court, the idea of a prosecutor, was something council was talking about before we had the Justice System Task Force even happened.
Is that talking about a prosecutor or a public defender?
Prosecutor.
The one is a prosecutor and the
Okay.
one is a defender.
So that one's new, right?
So, you know, number 2, the restorative justice and diversion program, that's about a prosecutor. The assignment of misdemeanor cases, that's something we've been talking about for some time. And then this one about a public defender for indigents, and I think there's some sense that we have some responsibilities there, maybe, but it, you know, and then the one on disparate impacts of the justice system on low-income people. I mean, I don't think we're going to get very far with that so it's these other pieces. So, I mean, I talked with Brian about it because there's a lot of weighty issues here, and they're going to take time to have a thorough and good discussion. And I mean, Brian's point was, what he said to me is, well, nobody's going anywhere, and it's not like we have to have all these discussions by the end of the year. If it's beyond, you know, we want to give them the time that they require to have good discussions and come to good decisions. So we're not going to just insist upon, I don't think, any committee of council can insist, but the only way we can complete the work and complete the recommendation is if we do the notice and comment, because we don't want to do it without staff input, and you're perfectly right, it should be coming to council too. So,
I guess I lost the
but the point here was kind of thinking about, how we put this on our agenda. So,
are you concerned that there are these activities that have been started, at least thinking
People
about,
are trying to
and
be
you're
brought
not
to-
going to get them all done by the end of the year? Is that a concern?
no, people are trying to get them done by the end of the year, but it requires staff input to make the recommendation, to complete the recommendation. And
So what's the concern? I'm not clear.
well, I basically I felt like I wanted to bring it to council because, the committees is really trying to finish up its work, and there's a lot of recommendations. And then I heard from Patty, staff's really busy, and I got the sense maybe that they didn't have time to deal with the notice and comment and give us their input. Well, then, so I just wanted to bring it to council for any direction council could provide.
And maybe I'll add another thought is that, okay, so what we've got before us these are the works, the work in progress.
Yeah.
So one thing we need to decide is what
The
do we have?
priorities, that's another
how to
question.
prioritize, what we have room for. But, to me, this also, I think they're tied together with the part about how should these move, in terms of the recommendations. And actually Judy brought up this point, but I think we do need to think about this holistically across all commissions, and it's come up many times, but how do we move those recommendations forward? So we avoid the problem you brought up, Mary Ann, of work being done. We continue to consider the staff load. And, council's got enough notice so that something about a diversion program doesn't show up in the paper and people ask us about it and we're like, what? So, I mean, I think those are the pieces.
Do you guys have anything am I articulating clearly for the committee, the task force?
In this last meeting, so I don't know.
I mean, if it were me, and if I were you, and I thought, we want to work on all these things, to me, it looks like these things, as you have said, are major things, and it's going to take more than the rest of the year to do them. So I'd say, hey, council, I think these are the things we want to work on.
They're being worked on.
Or we are working on. Do you think you want us to work on these things? And if you do, we need more time.
Well, that wasn't what I was suggesting, because I think the committee's ready to try to complete its work by the end of the year.
So I just have 2 quick
But that doesn't mean council has to take it up by the end of the year. I'm trying to make that differentiation.
Because I
Yes, you've been there.
remembered what I was going to say before when I got lost. After listening to this conversation, I think it does make sense to have a change in order of the call for public input. I think it does make sense. It doesn't matter how many people are commenting. I think if we get something out there that the council hasn't weighed in on, or that we're not sure that we want people to continue to work on, then we could create confusion or misunderstanding of what is and isn't going to happen and in what timeline. because it sets expectations to have it out there. So I think that's a good idea, and I hadn't really thought about that before. So I think that switching the order would be good. The other thing is that the Justice System Task Force had a long list of topics they were working on, longer than this. This wasn't a list of prioritization, like this is the most important, the second most important, the third most important. This was a list prioritized of what the task force thought they could begin to get to before the end of the year. So I think this is different than what you might be proposing as far as what is the future work of a group. Because that isn't what this is.
No,
This
that isn't
isn't
what
what
it
you're
is.
proposing for ongoing work. So I think we shouldn't mix those two things up.
I don't know if I've been clear. I mean, the Civilian Review Board, that was voted on the last meeting. A report that Pat had written about the research the police working group had done on it. And then she had written, a proposal that we proposed to council. If you're interested in thinking about a Civilian Review Board, we suggest you put together a group that has the particular expertise needed to consider it. And then there's, a full Civilian Review Board, and then there's lesser review processes that might have to just do with how complaints are taken. And, I mean, there's a range of things that could happen, which would not be a full Civilian Review Board, which I personally think would be difficult to pull off. I don't, but so if we don't want to put them, I mean, the other thing we could say to the task force, I don't know, does this make sense, Lisa? Is that in terms of the notice and comment, we go to the staff, and then, I mean, the notice and comment could just be, this is being discussed at JSTF meetings, and then coming to council, and that's where you can have input. I don't know, that'd happen later.
Yeah,
Or just in the fact that it's in our agenda.
Yeah, I think there's a variety of ways to do it. But I think more importantly, right for now, I think, if I'm understanding, is that you brought this not to go down into these, but more to contribute to agenda planning.
Yes, to think about agenda, and so that we could go back to JSTF and say, this is how it looks like it's going to come on to council agenda. And some of this, after talking to Brian, probably is not going to come onto our agendas till the council's agenda till next year, early next year. And it would be helpful, so I guess.
Right, but I will say, I mean, ultimately, it is going to impact at least my decision on whether we establish a commission or not, right? Because if these are issues we have to address, we're going to have to decide, if we don't have a commission, who's doing them, or we don't address them. So I mean, I do think it will ultimately impact that, but it is accurate that Judith brought this forward to think about, our agenda for the rest of the year
And so, yeah,
with regard to these.
For us and for the JSTF. So
Right.
there's not
And I think it's going to be important because these are big things. These are huge projects that have.
A lot of work's already been done.
Well, they have a lot of budget implications. They all will
Yes.
cost money. They will all take additional resources in terms of headcount, I think. So I think there's the philosophical underpinning decision, and then there's the, and can we do it in a lot of different ways question. And so there's these, and then there's the other proposal that is being brought that I don't think is the same as these. I'm out of the loop now, but, so not, well, whatever the proposal
Right,
is.
it's not the same. but
Isn't the same as this.
But I think it will impact, it's part of our decision, like what is
Right.
that commission going to do? And if these remain priorities, because I agree, I don't see how we can do all of this. I mean, what we talked about tonight was pretty meaty, and we still need, there's still a process for that. Well, one immediate decision we need to make is the public notice has not gone in the paper yet. So are we still putting that in the paper for the DRJ?
I would recommend that we do not. How do you feel about it, Judith?
That's the diversion.
I don't know. I mean, you know, this was a process that we agreed to, and I did report to council, and so I don't know if we have some obligation.
It sounds like Katie need to talk more about it.
I would like you not to do that. I would like the Justice System Task Force, of course, to have talked to the mayor, but to come to, unless you have already done that, come to council and say, these are the kind of things that we're thinking about before you put something in the paper.
Just to say, they're not just thinking about it. There's been a lot of work already put
Okay,
into
these are
this.
the things we've already worked on. We want you to know about it.
Well, before any further of these are, see, at the next JSTF meeting, I know there's a little group who are going to be meeting with the chief about this assignment of misdemeanor cases, which had come to us once, and so that is.
That's already come to council some months ago.
Mhm.
and I
Yes, and
don't
it's-
know.
That one's in
That
play.
needs to get wound down,
Get completed, yeah.
Okay, so,
Well, what I would suggest, I mean, in terms of notice and comment, I mean, if it sounds like council thinks we should hold off on the public notice.
I think, you know, maybe it could come into, you know, like after our next meeting, it could go out. And then, because I think a decision is maybe what that public notice looks like for this one. Because, you know, I'm hearing people say, like, okay, we're considering this idea, do you have any comments? As opposed to maybe something that's too structured, I don't know.
Well,
So-
I mean, you know, I do know something about restorative justice. I mean, I've done training in that. So I would like whatever the task force has been studying and recommending, I'd like that to come to council. I want to see it. And I'd like to see it before it goes out to the public.
So,
Do that?
yeah, I think that's an absolute approach, and I've sort of been sitting back just listening. So I know that I was pushing early on for a review because the establishment of the JSTF said there ought to be a review. But I was surprised, quite honestly, to hear that everybody was ready to pack it in by the end of the year. And now we are allowing the calendar to force decisions.
Well, we're not.
What-
I mean, I think that's why we're
The 2
discussing
years
this.
was up in September, and then we decided to December.
No,
and
no,
so-
no, let me, well,
Yeah.
and I didn't see the facial expressions after what I said, but the way I read things, it's a review. That doesn't mean you stop. It means we look at what you're doing, the whole list, not the short list. We look at the whole list of what you've been doing, look at the whole list of what you've been asked to do, and on down the list. And then we say, oh, wow, to Mary Ann's point, wow, there's a lot to do. Yeah, maybe you should consider more time. Not, since we're all going to pack it in and disappear by the end of the month, we got to cram all this stuff in one way or the other. So.
Right,
Well-
but I think you recognize that, Judith. I mean, in your comments, I mean, we're looking at what the JSTF has prioritized.
We were given to the end of the year,
So now
and
we-
that's what we're trying to abide by, is what council told us.
Right,
so,
but we
you know.
still have to make a decision about what
But-
makes it on the agenda. And,
Yes.
you know, so
yeah.
that's.
And I
what
think, I mean, I think, you know, some of this, the recommendations could be completed by the task force by the end of the year, and then people, you know, come back in when it gets to on the council agenda. And that was kind of Brian's point, nobody's leaving town, so if we don't have time to have the, you know, thoughtful discussions, we need to give time for thoughtful discussion and decision-making here. And I just wanted to let basically, I just wanted to let JSTF know if that is what's gonna happen, because I could sort of foresee that's what we were running into this issue. This situation, and I wanted to be able to say, it was discussed at the council, we're not gonna be able to discuss all these things.
Okay, so let me make this suggestion, because it, you know,
That's
it's
fine.
quite late. All right, so we have it on paper. That, I think, was the most important thing, and I appreciate that. We can discuss more at our next meeting, what council can prioritize with some input from staff, as well, what you guys are gonna have to do. And then I do think at some point we have to look at this recommendation process and nail something down. Because I like all the things that that JSTF is trying out, public notice, that's great. But just thinking about that order of events, so everybody's on the same page. Okay. So Marion, you had something briefly to update us on?
We can just
Okay.
move that to next.
Okay, great. So then, manager's report.
I'm just gonna try to pick out the important things, here. We can talk about the ribbon cutting at the water plant. Well, I really would like to make a decision on that because it's gonna take a while to plan that. So, does anybody have any issues with September 18th? And while you're looking, I'm gonna go ahead with a couple of other things. As you know, I'm going to be in and out vacation conferences. Anytime I'm not here, Johnny Barnes will be here. Please feel free to contact him with your questions. The paving will be coming into town sometime later this week or this month or in early September. And we'll have to close down the parking lot for a couple of days so that we can facilitate that. And then the other streets that they'll be paving will be East Limestone, Railroad Street, and Quarry Street from Dayton Street to the Glen Helen entrance. Gaunt Park Pool is closing, Labor Day is the last day the Gaunt Park Pool is open. We have lots of contractors around town doing different things like sewer relinings and gas line installation and tree trimming and all of that, electric poles, so.
And Lisa asked for next steps on infrastructure. Can you just briefly say what's up?
I can. I wrote that down and then went right past it, Lisa. I apologize. So we did, they did have a company bring a camera in and demonstrate it for it. I have not had time to sit down and talk to Johnny about the results of that, but this was their favored camera, so I'm anxious to kind of see. They actually took it over to Herman Street to look at the infrastructure around the Wright State property. Unfortunately showed we have some big problems over there. But as far as the operation of the camera itself, I haven't had a chance to sit down and talk with Johnny about that. I've written the 2 draft RFPs for stormwater study and electric system study. I've shot them over to Johnny to look at those. And hopefully, I've told him twice that they're supposed to be in a particular packet, so hopefully we'll get those in that packet.
And sidewalks?
Sidewalks, we're trying to contact Precision Concrete Cutting because Johnny would like to have them come in and do just a section of town to make sure that the results we're getting for the money we're spending are what we want them to be. So we're trying to get that bid from them to put that in the packets for September 4th to let that contract.
Thank you. So are we going to have another big chunk then on infrastructure planning? I mean, because there were those, for example, items that, they were kind of put over a range of years rather than expenditures in a particular year. And then I think that
I'm trying to rearrange the worksheet a little bit to see if I can make it easier for everyone to understand and spread it out. It's just so much information, it's taken a little bit of time, and obviously I have other things that I've
Right, oh, absolutely, and then I think it was being balanced against finance, right, to see what.
Yeah, but I have to kind of get it laid out over the years. We do have a 5-year capital improvements plan, but it's just not detailed enough. So what we need to do is take that and start plugging everything in.
Right, because I know that the community is interested in this understanding of, the amount of money in accounts and the utility costs, and I think until we get these answers about these expenses, we can't address some of those questions about the balances in the accounts.
Well, I mean, it may get to the point where council's gonna have to tell me what they want me to work on, because I'm kind of getting to that point where there aren't enough hours in the day, so you know, I mean, Judith, you know, yes, staff is busy, but, you know, now we have these two proposals, and we want to give our input, so, you know, we'll find the time, but, you know, you may have to tell me which direction you want me to go first, so.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question about the stormwater study. Will that give recommendations, or will it just tell us what the problems are?
The way the draft is written, it will be a survey of the entire system with recommended improvements, prioritized, and approximate costs attached to them.
Okay. Well, my understanding is that there is more, well, the more stormwater that can be absorbed by the ground, the better.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than funneling it through pipes and things. So it seems like having a company that is sort of at the cutting edge of how to have more impermeable surfaces, more permeable surfaces used for stormwater, the better. So is that going to be part of the RFP?
I don't think it's in there right now, although we do mention using swales and other natural drainage. I can change that and make that a little more definitive.
I think that would be a good thing.
Patty, do we, raise a question. I presume we do, but do we have like some zoning issues, some rules that suggest on a particular property how much has to remain permeable? Okay, I see a head.
We have stormwater regulations.
Yeah,
Okay.
regulations.
Yeah.
Okay.
But not about permeable surface. It's more like the
Oh,
water's
yeah.
not supposed to, it is?
Yeah, they're in the
Judy's saying.
county
Oh.
stormwater regulations, right?
Oh, yeah, it's specific in the zoning
Right.
code, how much, what percentage of.
And Patty, can you just briefly highlight what the investment committee did with our,
Oh, yeah, sure.
because it's kind of, Rachel's report came before some significant changes, so.
We had two CDs that were maturing, and so we took those CDs, moved them back into our accounts, and transferred them through a series of a couple of moves, transferred them into Star Plus.
Plus, besides those CDs,
Oh, and an additional 250,000.
2.5 million?
Well, that's a total of 2.5, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So the investment committee decided that we had a lot of money sitting in the US bank account that costs us versus gets us anything. So that was moved into Star Plus, and we're probably going to double our returns this year just from that movement. So Colleen did a lot of work to figure out how much we actually needed in our checking account to cover expenses. So that was something that, you know, Rachel mentioned in her report, but what wasn't reflected is that that shift happened, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
So,
good.
Yeah. Okay. Chris? Judy?
Nothing except school starts on Friday, so drive carefully.
Thank you. Okay, future agenda items.
In terms of September 4th, the report on community and police advisory boards, take that off.
Okay.
Oh, okay. What about the recommendation about?
Surveillance? That what
No, the things that go to mayor's court and things that go to.
Well, that's not complete yet.
So wait, that's coming off?
The advisory boards is coming off of the form?
Mayor's court recommendation with updated charges list.
Oh, yeah.
No, that's, not- yeah, that.
And that's coming off too?
That's coming off, yeah.
And then we've got.
Yeah, because we need another discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judith, we have that scheduled for Wednesday.
A meeting? Or is it going to be,
That mayor's court meeting is scheduled for Wednesday.
I know it is, but are we going to be
I-
ready to?
I thought that was what you needed to do, okay.
Because it's coming back to the JSTF, correct? That's my understanding.
I didn't know if it was or not, so I didn't know if.
You know what, let's check on it. Let me check on it.
Okay.
Marianne, did you want to put Housing Advisory Board and
Thought it
Planning
was.
Commission on for the next, you had wanted to comment on it tonight and had moved?
I think just like the 10-minute thing, probably.
Okay. So we've got the ordinance for surveillance technology.
And the village manager search process update, that
Yep.
would be like a 10-minute thing. When are we gonna start talking about budget?
Colleen hasn't set a schedule yet, but I'm sure it will be coming probably beginning in October at the latest.
Yeah, because given our concern, especially about utilities, I think we need to spend some time on the budget,
Yep.
not just business as usual.
So can we have a kind of proposed timeline for the budget on the floor?
I'm sending her an email so I don't forget.
Okay, cool. Anything else agenda related? Okay. And we have some other sort of topics for the future that probably will not happen on September 4th, but Judy and I will work on fleshing out future agenda items just to kind of start projecting. It probably is a good idea to see where we're going to be for the rest of the year because we got a lot of stuff. Okay, so anything else before we adjourn?
Actually, I'm looking at the 17th. There's the, okay, I guess that's two things. Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, then I will entertain a motion.
Second.
All those in favor
Right, we have to
signify by
stay
saying
up
aye.
all night, you guys.
Aye. All right, thanks, everyone.